Welcome back to episode 81 of Warriors Den podcast. In this episode, I have Sebastien Lavoie, who is a 20-year RCMP veteran, where he finished his career as the team leader for the local ERT, aka SWAT. That's the BC division. I guess their E division. And he also had military experience, and his story is very interesting, coming from a troubled youth to military to being a team leader in our ERT. Sebastien also does martial arts and has been doing so since the age of 3, and is now co-owner at Ascension Martial Arts in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. I believe he's a brown belt from the pictures I've seen. Yes, I think so. And I'd mention him at the end. You can check him out now if you want to. I forgot to mention he also launched a new company for consulting, etc., Raven Strategic. So if you want to check him out online, you can check him out on Instagram at Slav Commander, SALAVCCMDR, and or Raven Strategic are both on Instagram, and then you can check him out on Facebook via Ascension. And because he was saying Slav Commander is just his initials, as in Sebastien Lavoie and Commander. Nothing else. That's all. But first, this podcast is brought to you by Urban's Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions since 2013. Now, good news is it looks like our government here in British Columbia is done being silly. I think enough people yelled at them, not to mention the overwhelming scientific data against lockdowns and silly shenanigans. Classes should be back up for us and for Ascension as of June 15th this month. So I'm recording this on May 31st is the current date. So in 2 weeks, classes are back up for martial arts, though the details of that we don't know yet, but, contact everyone. So anyways, Urban Tactics Krav Maga, providing the top Krav Maga self-defense curriculum and program in Metro Vancouver. So you can check us out at urbantacticskm.com, and that's where you can sign up for the classes, etc. You won't be able to sign up if you're listening to this in the next week or so for new classes via the website yet, so just email me, info@urbantacticscanada.com, and I can sort you out for a date to get you started. Of course, I do private lessons, though Krav Maga is really best done in the classroom environment, but you can do that. You can also check out Urban Tactics Krav Maga on Instagram, Urban Tactics Krav Maga, and Facebook, Urban Tactics Krav Maga, and I believe Twitter, Urban Tactics KM, which just rehashes stuff. You can also support us by going to the Support Us page on UTKMblog.com. UTKMblog.com is where I do most of my ranting and actually post this podcast. So you can check that out. So, right now, an example of what I put up there, I am doing a 5 or 6 part series on the awareness color code and nervous system and mental health. I actually talk a little bit about it in the podcast. I like how Sebastien, or Seb as they call him, said it's operationalizing mindfulness for the practical, because the way they go about it, I think, is absurd. So I'm writing a series, for example, on awareness color code from white, yellow, orange, red, black, from the perspective of both mental health and practical self-defense. So that's what you can find on the blog. You can also find our curriculum, at least that's what I'm going to teach this week. So if you're a student of mine, don't ask me, check the blog every Mondays. And what else is on there? Right on that series, someone wrote, one of my instructors, Petra, wrote, was her experience growing up in Eastern Germany, doomed to repeat growing up in East Germany. It was a 5 or 6 part series where she discussed how a lot of what we're seeing in pop culture and ideological stances from the left, let's just say, is starting to make her nervous, reminding her of what it was like to grow up under the Eastern Bloc rule before the fall of the Soviet Union. So that's the kind of stuff we put up there. Sometimes it's self-defense related. Sometimes it's ideological or conceptual. It really depends on what I feel like writing or what contributors feel like writing. It's all related to self-defense, in my opinion, though, because an educated individual is better capable of defending themselves mentally, physically, intellectually, emotionally. The more you know, the better you are to defend. So don't just think self-defense is just physical. It's so much more. So on UTKMblog.com, you can actually hit the support us link and you can donate if you like to. Whatever you want to do. It's much appreciated. Obviously, I would love to pump out content like crazy, but I'm always running around doing all sorts of stuff. So the more support for this podcast we have, the more content I can do. And eventually I'll be able to hire someone as an assistant to help me out. That would be wonderful. You can also go to UTKMU.com. That is where I have put up in video format our curriculum. Now, I did put it up in quite a rush during COVID, so it does need a bit of work. But if you want to see what our content is as far as what I'm teaching Krav Maga self-defense curriculum-wise, you can get a paid access, either the beginner or novice curriculum. There will be more down the road. The more support I have from you, the more time I can dedicate to pushing out more online content. And that is UTKMU. I'm going to do a shameless plug here, where if you want to, actually 2 shameless plugs. I do teach the Canadian Firearm Safety course. So if you want to, we do have limited spots. The next available date is July 24th and 25th in Burnaby, and then September 25th and 26th in also Burnaby. So if you want to sign up for the PAL courses, spots fill up really fast closer to the time. urbantacticskm.com/Canadian Firearm Safety course. Actually, that URL is way too much. Just go to urbantacticskm.com and click on the CFSC/CRFCSC to sign up for that course. So there's one shameless plug. The other shameless plug, if you care about stuff other than self-defense and martial arts, I started a YouTube channel with my significant other. So we would very much like you to subscribe and like that if you would like. It is called Joe and John Do Stuff. A very good name, right? You can guess who the John is in that situation. And again, I did say it is a shameless plug. We don't have that many videos quite yet, but if you want to subscribe, it would be much appreciated. Because again, I said it clearly, I want to pump out content of all sorts of things. Right now, channel will have cooking and renovation stuff. I don't just do self-defense. And eventually we'll add on all sorts of stuff, lifestyle, beyond just, that. And again, my perspective is increasingly becoming, the more I know, that self-defense is so much more than just physical. So learning how to live your life happily and healthily includes in that. So that's what that channel is. Probably going to be an entertainment lifestyle channel. We will see. But please, shameless plug again, I know. Joe and John Do Stuff on YouTube. So if you want to check that out, that's another way that you support us. Because if we hit 1,000 subscribers, I can monetize it. So then I can do some awesome stuff. The more I don't have to work for other people, the more content I can inundate your mind with. So that's it for the plugs, I think. Again, Sebastien was with. We sat down for 3 hours. And by the way, if you no one has complained about the audio quality from the previous ones. That's what happens when people are using Zoom and they still don't have a professional microphone yet. This audio is great because my audio recording equipment prefers in person. So because I have someone I could meet in person, the audio is great. So anyways, I had Seb for 3 hours, and I'm just saying we went all over the place, right? So we talked my standard bio intro, introducing who he is, a little bit about him, and then we just kind of go from there, and we talk about everything from police use of force, training, mindset, what he's doing in life, the difficulties of being a police officer, as well as the public perception issues. And sort of a general theme was that you should be more informed. The governments need to inform you better about what they're doing, and that way the public isn't making crazy demands that are unrealistic and devoid of logic. But we talk about philosophical stuff. We talk about policing, jiu-jitsu, martial arts in general. It's not as long as my last one on ego. This one's only a little under 3 hours. So here you have retired Sergeant Major Sebastien Lavoie on episode 81. Enjoy. Krav Maga is not just a self-defense system. It is a way of life. Warrior's Den is a podcast for Kravists fighters, martial artists, warriors, politicians, and general citizens. Consider this. The society that separates scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. Lucidity. Your host, Jonathan Fader, talks to guests in an open and uncensored format about their fights, their philosophies, and their lives. No topic is taboo, and the conversation may start in one place and end in another. As the quote suggests, you cannot separate the warrior from the politics and the world around them, as a true warrior must be a student in all forms of art and science.
You're listening to The Warrior's Day. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.
Welcome back. I'm here with retired Sergeant Major Seb Lavoie of the RCMP and now co-owner of Ascension and owner of Raven Strategic. How are you today?
I'm great, man. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You're like starting to become a local legend, so I had to have you on. So I always start with the origin story. So chicken or egg question, what came first, policing or martial arts? And then start with whichever came first.
Roger that. Yeah, martial arts by a long shot.
Yeah.
I was 3 years old when I started in traditional martial arts, and that would have been a little bit too young for the old policing endeavors.
Yeah, for sure. What kind of martial arts did you do?
I started with Kung Fu, and now is the time to make fun of me. I started with Wushu, Chinese boxing, and moved on into eventually karate and eventually Muay Thai many years later.
Was this like in the 70s where like the Bruce Lee movies were all popular and that's the way?
You are absolutely on, my friend. I think part of that was me not having a dad. So Mom was like, look, if we don't get him sorted, somebody will.
Classic situation, right? Yeah, I think that's what I'm starting to realize. Children need mentorship. If it's not the parents, it needs to come from somewhere. So sometimes it's martial arts. Depends on the gym. So you started with Kung Fu, karate. And then when did you start sort of gravitating towards more, like, say, practical martial arts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Muay Thai in my teens. And as soon as I started in the force, I started traveling over to Thailand and training more seriously every couple years and spending time in camps and whatnot.
I meant to do that. COVID kind of hit it hard. I was going to do Thailand, Israel, and somewhere else I forgot, and we just got killed by this year. Right. So that's 3 years old onwards. What was at that time at least, your favorite style?
I suppose Kung Fu was at the time. I mean, we I'm from Quebec, and we really didn't have much in terms of diversity. Wrestling wasn't a big thing. There was hardly any grappling sports at all, and the choices were sort of kind of between Taekwondo, Kung Fu, and karate, right? So it was pretty slim pickings. Yeah,
you take what you can get. Even when I was coming up, like I remember asking, like, "Hey, I want to do martial arts, but I don't want to do katas," and my parents were like, "We don't know if that exists." So it just kind of hung in the air until adulthood, and then jiu-jitsu and all the other stuff showed up. So it's like sweet. So you're from Montreal. And were you policing in Montreal primarily or elsewhere?
No, I was in the military when I was back in Quebec. What was I, 18 to whatever it was, 20, 3 years, right before I got hired by the RCMP. And I ended up heading over to training at 20 and graduating at 21 here.
Oh, nice. Did you deploy anywhere in the military?
I did not, unfortunately.
Timing?
It was just a dead space and dead air. There was absolutely nothing going on in the Canadian Forces.
Peacetime army.
I mean, I can polish boots like nobody's business.
Yeah. Well, how was that experience though? You were saying your mother wanted you to have some guidance. Is that kind of the reason you went into the military in the first place?
No. The reason why I went in the military was as a stepping stone for policing. But I think what surprised me is how very effective it was in actually squaring me away for what was coming for me later. And just not everybody's made for it. But I found something that actually for the first time in my life I wasn't going to quit at. I wasn't going to leave, and I wasn't going to. So I really, I would say I credit the military with I haven't found myself.
Yeah.
And what I'm really passionate about.
This is where we can have an interesting conversation, because I was in the IDF and it's a very different experience. But what about it? Was it just the discipline or the regimented, like the schedule, or what made it that way for you?
I think that's part of it. So I think structure was evidently a part of it. But I do think that just the hard PT and getting out of my head. I was always on my head all the time, and getting out of my head and into my body, and really learning to drive hard and exceed the limits, the self-imposed limits, those types of things. Really started understanding that really this is a mind game. This whole business we call life. Yeah, it's all a mind game.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I learned too. Like, I'm not a physically gifted person. I struggle with the mindset thing, and I don't want to get into it yet, but it's more that, like, I know I'm not physically gifted, and a positive attitude will only get me so far with the physical, because I know what my limits are. Right, I learned that in the military. I pushed past them and then some, and then you learn how far you can go that you didn't know because no one pushed you. I mean, I saw guys in the Army pass out and then get up and keep going because their body was at its limit. They just needed a 5-minute rest and then get up and then go, or have some sugar. And it's crazy what you can watch people do. And then, like, I noticed the guys who did the best, we call them Spitzim, like they get the best scores, physically gifted, never challenged. You get that one exercise where they're actually hit that mental limit, and they fall apart, versus guys like me that are just like, this sucked the whole time. Just keep going, right?
Yeah, this is no news to you.
Yeah. And then for me, like, I was in the infantry, not disciplined. So it's a shock as a Westerner going there and seeing the complete lack of discipline. They think it is, but it's not. And then contrast that to the traditional Western ideology of discipline makes an army. And it's like, it's an interesting, is it really? I'm not sure anymore. Is discipline as what it's cracked up to be? Because for some people it works wonders, and then for other people it's kind of up in the air.
Yeah, there's a saying in Quebec that says the army either makes a man out of a bum or a bum out of a man, right? So it all depends. I think we'd be remiss to not speak about the fact that it's conscripted too, right? So that's a little bit different as well. It changes things a little bit.
Yeah, that's why they tend. I was told that, like, we don't want to be as harsh because a lot of you don't want to be here. So if we do that, we don't have anyone. The special forces, though, were like up every morning, running, doing the discipline, and if you weren't, they'd kick you out.
Sure.
Funny thing there is, you can lie, you just can't get caught.
Of course, I think that's across the world, man. In the military.
Yeah, and that's like the ethos. They wanna see that you can fake it if you get caught, but they don't want you to get caught, like in like a real combat situation, right? It's a thing that, like, the Hollywood movies in the military, it's like always something it's not.
Yep.
So what was your favorite experience in the military other than getting squared away? Yeah,
I mean, PT and all these associated endeavors like shooting and moving and communicating and doing all this stuff that I knew at some point. So I should have said that. But when I was wanting to join the RCMP, my goal was to go to the emergency response team. That was my sole purpose in life. I didn't want to do anything else. So for me, all those skills were going to be very relevant at some point in the future, and I really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's so you basically knew you were always going to go in ERT, and you just like textbook, set a goal, achieve it, do the work.
But I wasn't always like that, you know. Like it happened quite late. I was about 18 or 19, but before that, I was all over the place, man, and I couldn't keep a job to save my life, and I couldn't. So it wasn't always that simple.
I wouldn't say that's late. That sounds like it's right on time, realistically, right?
You're probably right.
So you go from the military to the RCMP. How is that transition for
you? One of the things I hadn't expected from the military is to like it and enjoy it as much as I did, and there were opportunities that were presented to me before I left for the RCMP that, looking back, I probably should have taken, but I didn't, and so we're obviously not living with regrets. But I think I was very surprised at how much I ended up enjoying it. So when I transitioned over, especially through training and everything, I realized that this wasn't the Army, and I had to do a lot of dialing down the intensity a bit. And for a lot of people, going through training, RCMP training is something that they consider very intense in comparison to some of the experiences that they had in their own lives. But for me, I was kind of looking around, eyeballs going, when is this getting really hard?
I remember I saw the video someone posted of the RCMP basic training, and obviously doesn't show everything, and I'm just like shaking my head. I'm like, that's not hard. Coming from the IDF, where it's like just non-stop, like just it's different kind of physical. It's just the expectation, like you don't rely on the machinery. It's all on your back, and you go, and then you do it, right? So
it's more your traditional sort of military hump. The thing is, and what I would say to that, just so that we don't take it or people don't take it the wrong way, is that when it comes to benchmarks in terms of academics and those types of things, then you have at the RCMP Academy, the challenges are way greher than they were in the military.
For sure.
So you're the beatings are not nearly as bad, but the law and ethics and and professionalism and police defensive tactics and driving and shooting and all these things are a different level, right? So
different skill set.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like when I teach Krav, like the traditional ideology of Krav Maga is aggression. Well, that comes from all the guys teaching the military, and then they find when they go teach civilians, it doesn't translate. Like my motto is turning lambs into lions, because I'm working with people with no experience, don't know their limits, don't know what they're, and I got to bring them up to be able to do the military stuff. And like everyone thinks that that's what Krav Maga is, but it's part of it, right? Because I got to teach you how to punch and kick before I can teach you how to tactically shoot. But everyone wants to learn the tactical shooting, but it is like that. All right, so I put it like civilian basic self-defense, then policing application, then military application, because the skill sets stack on each other with the most extreme use of force at the top. So it's probably similar if you were to stack the RCMP with the Canadian military on the top, I guess.
Sure, different mandates, but you're absolutely correct in your approach to your craft setup. I think that's bang on.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I was listening to John Danner. You follow him at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh man, I'm so happy he's saying what he's saying. It's because that's how I did it, and it's like he's one of the best in the world. And learning how to teach, right, whether it be police, civilian, it's a whole skill set on its own that I think a lot of people are lacking, unfortunately.
Of course it is. And if you haven't been in any of those two worlds, it's even harder.
Yeah. So you go to the RCMP. What's the path from starting to ERT?
Yeah, so I graduated in March of 2001, I believe, and I headed over to the island in Tofino. And I was asking for Surrey, of course, and they sent me to Tofino. I'm not going to sit here and complain about that posting specifically, because evidently there was a lot of hard work there, but it was very, very it's a very nice place to be.
So if people don't know, Surrey is, I mean, compared to other places in the world, it's not that bad, but it's a rougher area in Metro Vancouver, and then Tofino is like surfer's paradise on the west coast.
Yes, they're completely at odds. It's like heaven and hell type deal.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so it allowed me time to train. There's obviously the infrastructures in terms of having nature and the trails and the water and everything. So I was able to train, and my schedule was allowing me to train almost daily for some of the things that I knew eventually I would have to tap into. I also had access to a range. I also had unlimited ammunition. Right. So I really spent. I took instructor courses in use of force and all types of courses that were right in line with my what would be needed from me as an ERT person down the line. And it allowed me to work up a skill set, a fitness, and a mindset that was conducive to not only be successful on ERT but become potentially uncommon amongst the uncommon. And that, I think, was the goal. I didn't want to just be a dude on the team.
I should clarify for non-Canadians, ERT is essentially SWAT. Right, they do all the real fun stuff, kicking the doors and stuff. What is sort of the requirements or expectations for someone to transition into ERT?
Yeah, I mean, things obviously are evolving quickly, and I've been retired now for 10 weeks, and it's seemingly I've forgotten my name even. Just things go out so quickly. But basically, generally around 2 or 3 years of service, you have to have impeccable references to begin with, and that includes your peers, not just your supervisors that want to get rid of you. And so once you are being supported to go to selection, you go to a 5-day selection camp. At least that's the case here for the Lower Mainland Emergency Response Team, which is a team that I was on, full-time team in the Lower Mainland, one of the busiest in the country. And then once you're supported for selection, you go to selection. So you have your 5-day selection camp, which it has everything you might imagine, like the physicals, the cognitive, behavioral, teamwork, and everything in between: shooting, moving, communicating, team evolutions, whatever. Name it. It's in there for 5 days solid. There's interviews as well and other things. Once you make selection, you're successful on selection, then there is an additional, I believe, around 18 days of training, which is considered selection phase 2. This is where you start acquiring some of the hands and feet skills to do the job, but not quite to the level where obviously you're going to be trained, because eventually you have to go to training. So it's just making sure that the person is capable of matching the steep learning curve on the emergency response team course in Ottawa, and that they will be successful in that endeavor and come back to the team as trained operators.
So you go selection, essentially 18 days of training, assessment, and then there's further training.
That's right. It's 8, 9, or 10 weeks now of training in Ottawa, where you get the full package. So pistol package, close protection, I mean, name it, like tubular assault and ambushes and rural tactics and anyway, urban tactics and stalks and whatever, right? Like it just
the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So if we were to compare it to, I remember there was that movie SWAT. Is it anything remotely like that at all?
Absolutely not.
I didn't think so. That's a pet peeve, right, for people who've actually served. Like, can you stop talking about the movie, right?
A guy I know, and he consistently brings back the show SWAT.
Oh yeah, it's a bit before my time.
It is
I think.
The remake. Right?
Oh, the remake.
So a couple years ago
on Netflix.
And he forces this stuff down my throat by sending me episodes, and I spent 2.5 minutes, and I'm like, oh my God, get me out of here.
Yeah, my girlfriend doesn't like watching war movies with me because I'm like, nope. Like, for the love of God, can you stop putting burst fire on all the guns? Like, just stop. It's movie. I had a student the other day saying stuff about it. I'm like, just anything you see in a movie, just stop talking. You retrain it. So you go through all that process. Then how do you go to you're a team leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does that, you make that jump obviously over a few years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how is that transition?
Yeah, I mean, the entire time for me, that was always the ultimate goal. The goal was not only to get on the team, but also to have a team. But not just to have a team of guys that were assigned to me, but to have a team of guys that wanted to be assigned to me, which is a very different,
Jocko style, right?
Yeah, which is a very different, prospect, right? So I believe I was on the team for 5 years. I was a breacher. I was a primary breacher for many years, which is the person that's responsible to get the team inside wherever stronghold we're going to. It's interesting because we have a really high ratio of team leaders promoted from the breaching program, which is interesting. We like to say that we're smarter than everybody else, but I don't think that's the case. So I went from being a breacher to 2012 being promoted as one of the corporal, which is essentially an element leads. But I mean, along the way, over the course of those 5 years, I mean, you are consistently leading elements. So it's not like you have no leadership experience and eventually you get a promotion. It's more like you were given a small task, you completed properly, you were solid, you were able to get the feedback, you were able to get better. If there were mistakes made, you were able to not repeat them and do all this stuff. Then you're moving on, and then you have a bigger task, and then a bigger task, and another one, and eventually you're controlling multi-elements, doing things, and you've demonstrated that to the point where the team believes in you and management believes in you. So you become the person that's essentially capable of being in the middle.
Yeah, and I mean, in Vancouver, like, most people probably don't even know we have you guys.
Mhm.
They so, oh yeah, police took down this thing, and they don't realize it's like a tactical team.
They think it's a ferry.
Yeah.
It's a ferry's flying in.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
when I tell people like, hey, you know, we have our own spy agency in Canada, and people are like, we do? I'm like, yeah, that's why you don't know about them. They're doing their jobs. But I think it's like Canadian media has a very different approach to dealing with policing in Canada. They actually don't talk about stuff a lot unless things go horribly sideways, and then everyone hears about you guys. What was your relationship with the media in that position?
You know, it's quite interesting. I have a bit of a different take than some of my colleagues on the whole media piece. I think we need to be proactive with our communication, and you know what a strange concept, right?
Yeah.
And we've worked very hard to achieve that when I was on the team. And some of the I think of some of the best press that we've had over the years had to do with a media person being on site and me being like, look, they're not interfering with anything. Stay there, shoot your footage.
Yeah.
This is kind of a gross outline of what happened, what could be disclosed that wasn't protected, that wasn't held back, so to speak, and provide them with a safe area where they could do the shooting and all this stuff. And when you do that, instead of trying to prevent them from being there and be in their face and ask them to turn the cameras off, they tend to treat you very differently. And a lot of operations we were on as ERT were portrayed in the media very, very positively. And I suspect that had a lot to do with it.
Oh, that's good. I find the Canadian media treats policing generally a lot better than what's going on in the States now. So we've sort of established you're kind of expert use of force and policing. Are you glad you got out now before all this craziness? Well,
I actually, was on the tail end of some of the stuff that went majorly pear-shaped last week. The answer is yes and no. I mean, a lot of the current issues are historical in nature. A lot of those issues are essentially been trusted upon the rest of the membership by previous generation members, right?
The old boys club sort of thing.
Well, I mean, and there were tons of good members in those times as well. But if you look at some of the lawsuits and some of the $100 million this, $100 million that, I mean, we are paying most of those grievances were put in and occurred 20 to 30 years ago, and 20 years ago.
Yeah, so for non-Canadians, it's just elaborate on that a little bit because they might not know.
Yeah, I mean, anything. We had a few lawsuits, harassment against women in the force, and some other groups as well, and some issues, historical issues with some of our obviously indigenous communities or some of our other communities. So we. It's tough because a lot of those we're not abdicating responsibility. It's critical that we take responsibility for all those things. But at the same time, it kind of sucks for the current generation to really be sort of dragged everywhere on account of a lot of the stuff that was done prior.
Now, because this is audio only, and I want to get into the state stuff. What is your ethnic background so people don't jump down your throat too much?
So I got about 17 different regions in me according to my DNA, my Ancestry.ca, but I'm essentially half African and half French European. My mom was white. My dad, I don't know him, but we'll have to guess that he was black because
some kind of darker skinned individual.
Because I'm dark, but I have several regions in me, which is quite interesting.
So that gives you a perspective that that's I am a minority being Jewish, but the whole visible minority thing, people like you're not a real minority. So you're in a perspective where you can come from both sides a little bit, and you also have the use of force, like wealth of use of force experience from martial arts, policing, and military, which is actually very rare for someone to have all three components. So you're like the gold star of. What are your thoughts on what's going on, particularly in America, which is spilling over globally, essentially from a civilian perspective?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have a lot of friends that are officers in the States, but most of them were met through SWAT training or some joint exercises or whatever. So a lot of them were elite, so to speak, because we're talking about professional team. I'm not talking about like I wasn't with training with Timbuktu SWAT, but we had some, if we're training with LA or Miami-Dade or whoever, professional teams, you find them to be extremely professional. There's obviously minorities in all those teams as much as we have here, and so it doesn't just seem to be the issues don't seem to be a bit muted, so to speak. But I have never spent a day policing New York. I have never spent a day on the beat policing LA. I have no idea. I know the socioeconomics and social demographics, even in the United States, is I mean, this is problems compounding over problems, right? And then you have the propensity of using weapons. You have the stiffness of the sentencing, which a lot of people, here we're too soft, over there they're too hard. We should meet somewhere in the middle. Because if you're committing a crime right now, and you know that if you get caught, even if it's a chocolate bar theft, you get caught and you're going in because it's your third strike, and you're going in for 140 years. The best option is to shoot your way out of that. There's no question, and I'm not pretending to be sitting here and saying that I wouldn't do the same. It's just it's completely atrocious. And so when you look at it objectively, there's a lot to unpack there, and to make matters worse, everybody has guns, everybody, and I'm not take the guns away or whatever.
That's good to hear.
No, absolutely not. It's like let's regulate them and do what we do. I think we do a great job here, unlike what the PM is saying. But
we can get into that. I'll go on for hours. How much though the issue with policing is misunderstanding from the public of use of force?
Well, I wouldn't put that back on the public. I would put that back on police. It's a deflection, in my opinion, to say that if the public doesn't know what we do, it's their fault. It's not. If the public doesn't know what we do, it's our fault. We didn't communicate it properly. We didn't put the product out there in terms of documentaries or series or even open and bilateral communication in any format. Let it be social media or media itself, or even press conferences or whatever the case may be. So for me, I know that police in general have done a piss poor job in communicating with the public. And so I don't expect the public to know the things that they should know so that they understand a little bit better.
No, I'm totally with you. Like, I was trying to write, I did write a blog article a while back looking at police training after George Floyd, and it was very difficult to find like a comprehensive idea from a lot of forces what exactly their training mandates. And then I had some private messages saying, no, you got it wrong. I'm like, hey, this is what's on their website, or I can't find anything. And then some police force did what their training was. I'm like, that's not good enough. And then other training, it was like, it's way too long, but not efficiency. And then I was looking into like German, what it takes to become a German police officer. And it's a full 4-year degree with like apprenticeship process. So even if you ask Germans, they'll be like, yeah, but it's still not good enough. I'm like, hey guys, that's like, they take it seriously over there. And if you want to be a cop, you can't just do some 6-week course. You already have to be educated. Then you have to do a specialty degree, including training. And then if they like you, they'll take you, right? And you start seeing all over the world, like the different standards and expectations of policing. And it's all over the place. Even though we have 2 arms, 2 legs, and the same brain, why is it so different? What do you think? Is it just politics, or is it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, politics is definitely involved in all of those things. I would say that fiscal concerns are also involved in
money.
And it's always a thing. There's also, where are you at, and how appealing are you as a department, and what can you actually afford to pay your people? And then once that's established, who is actually coming to you in light of what you're offering? You have a lot of departments doing things the right way, having people with, and I'm gonna stay away from saying that people with degrees are always the best to be hired.
Well, I agree with you on both. Both arguments are fair.
Yeah, of course. I've seen plenty of dummies with degrees, and plenty of people without degrees come in from the prairies somewhere and just be absolutely stellar from an intellectual standpoint. So I think, but definitely some of the things that we really shouldn't be compromising on is selection. Right. And that's a difficult part, and it's much more difficult than it looks. Because you're trying to get people to come in so that you can actually sustain the retirement rates and you can sustain the task. And all these other things, but you're also not getting the numbers. So now you're getting the numbers, you're getting really, really picky, you're eliminating half the numbers. So it becomes difficult. So you really have to, but I think we agree that standards are critically important. So you have to establish a reasonable standard. And that standard should be very similar in all developed countries, in my opinion. I don't know why there is such a discrepancy. But just to go back on something you said, I would tell you that we've had people from all over the world coming over to the RCMP Academy for training because it is an incredibly valuable and very, very good and well thought of training program. So there's no question that the training program at Depot is a solid training program. Could it be better? Can always be better. But I think the problems might be a little bit before that.
Yeah, well, because the selection, so let's start with that, then we can talk about training. Obviously, you're in a position to really understand, like what's the number one thing you want to look for in a candidate, and then let's flesh it out to say top 5, because obviously one thing is kind of hard.
Yeah, I mean, this would be a long and extended conversation. I mean,
we have time.
I mean, from my own opinion, from Seb Lavoie's opinion, I think that we're really failing and putting too much emphasis on some of the perhaps academics versus character trait based leadership, emotional intelligence. Those types of things that are that are underrated in policing, but that have been critically important in the corporate world, and you're seeing more and more of those companies testing their CEOs for things such as EQ and having the ability to be self-aware, to self-regulate, to have people skills, to have care and wellness for their people, to be driven, to have a plan, to communicate it, to have all those things.
Have your shit together, really.
Essentially, like if we're gonna call a spade a spade. I think character-based selection is what needs to happen. I think that there is enough smart people out there in terms of psychologists and professionals in that field that there could be extensive testing conducted. Sorry. I'm being French and English here, but testing conducted, and that we could have an acceptable range. Like, you don't have to be, because too much of anything is no good. Like if you have too much emotional intelligence, you spend your time talking, doing things. You
too
may
touchy-feely.
You may be lacking. You may be lacking some of the innovation and having a hard time thinking outside the box. Those types of things. Those are traits that are generally assigned to people that have too much of one thing. But you could definitely have a spectrum, like an acceptable spectrum from here to here, where all and anything in between is actually a valuable asset to your organization.
Sort of like if I'm picking instructors, I don't care if they're the best technically. I want them to be able to show me they can adapt and learn and grow, because I've had some people who are technically really good, but the moment I'm like, hey, I'm changing the curriculum, they're like, no, I just learned this stuff. I'm like, but that's how it works. Like, we found something better, let's change it. And I think that open mind and that sort of, it is really, I don't care how good you are now. If you're mediocre technically, but you can adapt and learn, I think it's a very important skill set.
Oh yeah, that flexibility is absolutely critical. And a lot of the organizational problems that we've had over the years had to do with the resistance to change.
Yeah, huge one.
And it's interesting, because even the people that are put in charge in positions of, say, leadership, that are in charge of overseeing said change, are themselves resistant to it. So you're fighting an uphill battle. It's like pushing a rope uphill, You're just fighting an uphill battle and trying to get things done.
Like, occasionally I'll get an officer who's like, I want you to come in and teach our unit. and then it never, ever, ever happens.
Yeah, because as soon as he goes and speaks to anybody else, that somebody else is like, okay, well, we just called this unit and that unit, and they said, well, we
have a guy,
or it's not in line with what we're teaching, or maybe that person doesn't know the job. So here's the way I circumvent these problems, because I've encountered that myself. So it's essentially the person that's in charge of the unit that I link up with to go do the customized training with. They are responsible for the maintenance of SOPs in terms of their, the specific unit's operational deployments procedures, right? So I'm not coming in there saying, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and then you're going to move your body over there. Like, is this part of your SOPs in terms of deployment, especially if you're in a special tactical unit? Anyways, but so then what happens is that person is responsible for the safeguard and the maintenance of the SOPs of the unit proper. If there is issues and they think that perhaps something is conflicting, we have that conversation, and then we can push it up, or we can change it and we can adapt it. So what you end up doing is, what you're showing them to do is how to do certain things, not when. And so when you start shifting that mindset a bit, then it's easier to take a little piece of the pie and address it, and then they can put it in an overall context. You go to another piece of the pie and fix it.
Well, no, that's totally. Hey, I've asked that to people. It's like, okay, what am I working with? What are your operational procedures? What can you not do? What can I like? Obviously, striking is out for a lot of officers in a lot of applications. Not every time, but Krav specifically, they're like, oh, you're gonna kill each other. We can't have you doing that. I was like, no, I'll show you arrest techniques or adapt or grappling, right? So if I have a student coming in, for example, and they're like green, I'm like, we're not starting with grappling because I don't want you to go to the ground on the street. They come in like, I'm a cop. I'm like, okay, I'm going to introduce grappling a lot earlier for you because you need that, right? So it kind of brings us to like that training aspect of if selection, you want kind of emotionally stable, adaptable people, then like I read through what I could see publicly on the RCMP basic depot, and the amount of hand-to-hand combat I'm like, it's nothing. Right, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're actually doing a fair bit if you take it in the context of how much stuff there is to go over. But I will say that depot isn't really the issue. Is a year out.
After depot.
A year out of depot, then you are, completely left to your own demise. And there'll be very, very slim to no training, maintenance training, right? And so it would be possible to potentially change the program in a way that, say, you come out of there as a blue belt, but more importantly,
in jiu-jitsu,
and a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, and you have some striking, some basic striking, some takedowns, obviously that you're going to need, and then when they come out, what we've actually done is potentially influence them to want to carry over, and that is the piece where we fail. So it's decent and we put them through, but we make it semi-miserable where they really, and tons of good people teaching in those, obviously at depot in those units, but I mean by way of process, because there's so much, to learn and so much to do, and it's time compressed, so it's difficult. But when they come out of there, they're left to their own device, and that is an absolute fail.
So that's consistent from pretty much anyone. More training, more consistent training. Like I think Jocko Willink was saying, what did he say? You need a blue belt or purple belt. That's what they want to see for jiu-jitsu, as far as, because grappling is such an important aspect of arresting someone, right?
Oh yeah, and I mean, I would go a step further and say, do we need to impose belts? I mean, for me, if I look at a purple belt, say in a tournament that will look like a early blue, imagine when there's actually the stakes are even higher, because now you're fighting on the street, that kind of thing. So if you are operating at a brown belt level in a gym, you're likely a blue belt in policing, right? So if you go too low, you kind of
So you think maybe like just as a comparative skill, maybe a purple belt at least is probably a good mark for jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, I mean, even if you said like, look, we're going to do it over 5 years or 6 years or 7 years, even if we said 10, imagine if every cop out there was a purple belt at 10 years of service.
That would be a big difference.
Incredible difference. And I can tell you that from my experience, and having been, and of course there were other experiences, and I was a bouncer and all these other things, so I had other experiences in stress inoculation that came from those experiences. But I can tell you that, not once have I felt like, oh, I'm fighting for my life here. And that's very different because there are people out there that every time somebody resists, the perception is that they're fighting for their life.
Yeah.
So what do you think they're going to do?
Panic.
Yeah, and then what? Overreact, right?
Yeah.
And so, and sometimes justifiably so.
Yeah.
But because based on the totality of their own circumstances, they found themselves stuck in that,
Now I wonder, is the reason you were never, or didn't feel, because were you in like situations physically where your life could be in danger? Versus like you felt like your life was in
when
danger?
I was on the RT?
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, okay.
All the
just
time.
clarify.
Yeah, I was there. There's many times where I stood there thinking,
I'd
I
be
am
shocked
not
if
going
you
home.
weren't.
Yeah.
The gangsters, what are you guys doing?
I am not going home.
Yeah, no, but just because like I'm wondering if it's like someone of your caliber and people of your caliber, right? You guys are essentially the pinnacle of policing mentally and physically, and you're a lot more comfortable and mentally willing to do that work. So it's less likely you will be overwhelmed mentally versus, say, an average police officer who hasn't gone through all those hoops or hasn't done all that self-improvement, and they will get overwhelmed. Now, an example, a very, like, this is going to be spoken about for years, I think, in police training is the Duante Wright one, where she pulled out the taser. Now, this is my analysis of that, is the training worked, but not even remotely to where they need to be, like the 4 stages of learning theory. She's at, like, the 2nd stage, where she's not good enough with that taser and gun simultaneously to automatically in real time recognize this isn't the tool I thought it was. But obviously her training was enough that she's screaming taser, taser, taser. So she was in the conscious automotive or unconscious, one of the sort of 2nd stage, right? So it's like the training is working, but she failed.
Incompetence
yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
I can never remember the stages,
That's
but she, so you're aware, it's good. But she wasn't at the point where for me, I'm like, you can't tell the difference between a gun and a taser. It's a bright yellow thing, right? So people will look at and say she doesn't have enough training. I'm like, well, hold on. The training is there. It's actually kicking in, but her level of training wasn't enough to handle that level of stress, right? And I look at it, I'm like, man, you had 3 cops on the guy, so your ability to immobilize him without a tool is not there, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I haven't, in all full disclosure, I haven't watched the video because I just sort of tried to stay away as much as I could. Although when I was instructing full time, I did it just by virtue of wanting to know what happened, so that I could learn and teach upon that. So I haven't looked, but I know for us, I mean, that's an off-sided carry anyway, so I don't even know how that happens.
Yeah.
Like she's taken it from her offside and transferred it to her pistol side, which is what you normally would do if that's what she did, or she carried it pistol side, which is a no-no. Yeah. So I'm not sure what she did specifically. So
yeah, I mean, that's often a lot of civilians will know. They'll say, why don't they just carry it on the other side? You have your pistol on your dominant hand, your taser on the other side. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure she did. But to me, just from like a neurological perspective, when you, like, Krav thinks about this a lot, is that we're training for your absolute most panic response, where you're in not at the best neurological state. So your mind is going to default to what you're most trained in, which is her sidearm pistol. But her conscious mind's probably like, I need to tase him. But her automated response was actually, because that's what she was overwhelmed, and she went to her most primal, most instinctual response, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, ultimately, I don't think that this was a psychomotor issue. This was a psychological response to a hormonal change. Yeah. Like, she basically was completely overwhelmed from a stress level. Yeah. Is essentially what happened, right? Yeah. And again, I haven't watched the whole thing, so I don't want to.
Well, I think it's just, I think you should. It's like, just, it's so, I'm not judging. It's just, I looked at it from like a neurological training perspective. I'm like, this is a textbook case that you can actually look at when training goes right and wrong. Like, which aspect, obviously it's very unfortunate and it shouldn't have happened, but it's like, I'm intellectualizing the situation, saying, well, she said taser, taser, taser. So that kicked in. And the other officers let go. But then she shot the guy because she's obviously panicking. And the civilians watching that, it's like, oh, that's murder. I'm like, no, I can see exactly what's going on here. Yeah. And this is just a total, like, this is, every PR's nightmare. But I'm like, I find it fast. That specific case, as opposed to a lot of the other one, is like, I'm just like palm in the face. That particular case is like, it's interesting. from a training perspective.
No, it is. You're absolutely right. But here's another side of this coin as well is that she'll never recover from that.
Oh no, of course
Period.
not.
And I mean, people can sit there and say, well, I woulda and shoulda and coulda. I mean, you're sitting on the couch while they have to make those split-second decisions, and then you have the totality of the circumstances. You see from the bird's eye view. Mistakes are made. This was obviously a mistake that was made, but make no mistake about it, she is not recovering from that.
Yeah. She's never working again, for sure.
Well, excuse me. No. And even if she is, back to work, how is she recovering emotionally from that if she's a good person, which likely she is, because most of our officers are. So it's not like she's not a good person, and if she isn't, then we don't want her in the job guaranteed. But it sucks both ways, right?
Yeah,
it really does.
So that brings up the case. Like, I don't think the public realizes just how demanding mentally and physically. Like, I think being police officers, like the divorce rate for a lot of police, right, is very high. Same for like special forces. It's just that, especially when you get into ERT or that, you're like on call a job first always. Now, one of my perspectives in Canadian, because they like RCMP generally 12 on 40, and I think all first responders, police, nurses, doctors, firefighters may be okay because of the way they do their job. Sit around and, okay. I just don't think you guys should be allowed to work past 8 hours unless it's a specific tasking because of how humans work. And then the reason why we're not doing that is logistics and politics and money. But if we keep acknowledging like, hey, office worker has a 20-minute attention span, and the police officers need to be on for 12 hours and make the right decisions. I'm like, I just think at least in Canada, the structural system isn't addressing the mental aspect of the stress of being a police officer. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings. I think in addition to what you're saying, definitely the way we run our schedules isn't right, and that you should have a day shift block, a night shift block, and a training block. Yeah. So every 3 weeks should be a training week, right? Yeah. I mean, in an ideal world.
So like 1 week day shift, 1 week night shift,
1 week training.
Yeah.
Done, right? And that's what the team did, right? That's what we did.
Yeah.
And there were reasons for that. And those are all perishable skills, and they have to be maintained. And not only maintained, but they also have to be built upon, because the complexities of the situations that you'll be engaged in will increase. Yeah. And it's good to have the ability to deal with things at a much higher level of complexity. But what I would say is, even if you had, most of those 12 hours on patrol, you're not taking your breaks. Yeah. If you are, you get interrupted midway all the time, midway through a meal or whatever the case may be. Most of the police officers that work their 12-hour shifts don't even eat properly because they're running and writing and doing all this stuff at the same time. Yeah. And alternatively, if you were to go to an 8-hour model, now you're looking at having them work every day, except maybe on the weekends, which doesn't work because it's a 24/7 coverage, right? So just that piece doesn't work. But imagine if we did, say, for lack of better terms, we would go 12 hours day shift, 12 hours night shift, like two blocks. Yeah. And then on your third block, it's kind of a deloading block where you could go down to, you could still do 12, but in there could be resilience training and sensitivity training for when it's needed. Obviously is, and all these other things. So not only the hands and feet skills in terms of tactical and the application of force, but all the gambit of things that have to be taught to police officers, which is massive.
So sort of like it's a diffusion of the nervous system plus acquisition of skills. Like I find I'm a high stress, I'm a weird individual, but even I find I started going camping and hunting in the last 2-3 years, and I find if I don't go out even for a night or two every 2 months, like my natural stress has gone through the roof. So just getting like a break from that monotonous continuous thing, and then adding in some training, I think that's definitely a way to go. Some people have said one day a week even for training, but I don't know how that works with your guys' schedule.
Yeah, I don't know that it's logistically feasible, and I don't know that you would want that. So imagine you hit your first day shift, you get hosed by a whole bunch of things, and then you have to catch up. You have these in custodies, you have paperwork out the yin yang, and I mean that's one of the other pieces that I think the public doesn't really fully appreciate, is that paperwork and the actual administrative stress in policing is completely asinine.
Yeah.
And so, just to go back on one of the things you had said earlier, speaking of the teams and ERT as being the elite of policing and all this stuff, it is for the hands and feet and the tactical stuff. But when you're talking about, say, the investigative sections that have to be equally as elite, but in their own field of endeavors, now you're looking at them requiring the same amount of training, but on an administrative level, right? So, for me to sit here and say, oh, this was much harder. Well, it depends. Because when I moved into an administrative position after being on the team for 12 years, my stress level was way higher than if I dealt with any sort of, in progress, explosion of action or whatever the case may be as a team leader, even though theoretically my position was an administrative position for the last 2 years as a team leader, because I was in a command post and I was, my guys on the ground would be doing their thing, and I would be enable that to happen. But it's just I don't know what the perfect schedule is. I mean, I believe it would take people a lot smarter than me to really establish what it's like. Now, the 12 hours is great, and that you get 4 days off, and that 4 days off is a beauty. I mean, who gets that, right? And it's important for cops not to forget that, because really, once you've worked a bunch of hours during the day, it doesn't matter if you go 2 or 3 more. It really doesn't. If you have breaks, if you have some consistency. But I don't know, man. I don't know what the answer is.
It's just it's a thought, because
certainly
the trying to get better decision making out of policing can be done through maintaining lower stress levels, which means shorter shifts or more sleep or whatever the solution is. Though I feel that the public doesn't understand that sort of aspect, and it's not coming out fairly, and you're seeing, I don't know the numbers, but suicide is an issue with policing and military. I don't know what the Canadian numbers are off the top of my head, but it's because it's not getting addressed. And now you mentioned, a lot of the problems in Canadian policing are holdovers of the old school ways. It's kind of like you're just resolving all the issues. What did you see as far as mental health? Is it are they trying to push woo-woo-y, or are they pushing more practical mental health for officers these days?
Yeah, man, it's the whole sort of mental health strategy is a giant beast, right? But actually, it's really simple. So before I left, I was working with a commanding officer here in BC. As an advisory NCO or non-commissioned officer. I was basically an advisor to the commander, and in that capacity, I was sent to interview some of the people that have been involved in use of force and critical use of force, where they may have taken somebody's life, or they may have been their own life is almost taken, or whatever the case may be, and to see where the failings of some of the processes. And I didn't do it sort of clinically. I did it really introspective. Well, how have I treated my guys? What kind of process did we have so that our guys would be healthy and come back? But not only come back from critical calls, but also go back to one a couple of days later, and a couple of weeks, and a couple of months later. And how do we keep him healthy that way? And one of the things that I came to realize quite quickly is that resilience, or the ability to take hits, drive on, but also recover from them, is intrinsically linked with leadership. Because without leadership, you're not getting any of the stuff that's needed. And a lot of the times, it's not the events themselves that are hurting our people. It's the reaction from either the leaders or the process, the clinical process, while they're in a highly emotional and stressed out, state. And so for me, I think that we're overthinking the mental wellness piece quite a bit. I think that what needs to happen, start with fixing the leadership problem. And I'm not talking about just ranked leadership. I'm talking about that's everybody's responsibility, as a senior constable, as a corporal, as a sergeant, whatever.
Jocko ownership kind of
what
thing,
are you
right?
actually doing? What are you actually doing to make a difference here? And also, you want to have the right leaders to enable all the pieces for the recovery process, but also to give people time to deload, work the recovery process cooperatively, do all those things. So you need excellent leadership. If you don't have that, we have a bigger problem. So now you have a compounding issue. So if you're talking about mental, you can come out with 150 different mental health strategies.
Yeah.
What that person wanted was for the boss to not treat him like they were guilty of something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that never happened.
Yeah.
So that's what's created issues. So you occasionally you will have the person that's seen something horrible and as a direct link between seeing that or being involved in that event and what they have seen or done, they are now, hurting. Yeah. But the majority of the time, they expect that, because when they came to policing, they expected to see certain things that others, wish not to see, as shouldn't really. And what happens is, because there was a bit of a mental preparation there, preemptively they were ready for that. And the hits that you're ready for is better than the hit you're not ready for. What it weren't ready for is to get so-called not abandoned, but what's the word, either mistreated or
lost in the bureaucracy.
Either the bureaucracy or lacking the support of the leaders.
No, that's interesting. Because I have a degree loosely in psychology, not an expert by it, but one of the courses I did was actually psychology of genocide, and one of the professors I was at Kwantlen, and they had a professor from UBC come in and discuss PTSD, and and I started to see this in college students is the approach of handling mental health is, I think, as you say, it's just all over the place, and I think they're convincing people that they have PTSD that didn't, because when you look at the statistics, it's on average 12% of people who experienced a traumatic event develop it. Amongst Holocaust survivors, it's interestingly less. It's like 10, 11%. But the idea was, their theory is, they were the mentally strong ones that survived. And so it's the idea people don't know how to apply it in a way that's meaningful. And I just thought that's why I think a lot of college kids are so anxious nowadays, because they've been convinced you have problems. It's like, no, dude, you're fine. And that's what you learn in the military, or is that mental toughness. And say you take ERT or special force, well, it's like, guys, these guys or girls are already mentally strong. That's not what's going to break them. And then occasionally you'll get someone who just, so I think actually shell shocked. Well, imagine being in World War I after being a farmer in rural nowhere forever. Then that experience is so beyond your understanding, bombs and tanks, and to be so overwhelmed. But nowadays our bodies are so used to so much stimulus. It's more, I think you're right, it's more about the de-escalation, just calming your nervous system down and relaxing so that it's not running hot all the time, and then of course not getting thrown under the bus by the politics.
It's amazing the amount of issues that causes. A lot of people won't necessarily have an issue with what it is that they did or they had to do, but they will have an issue with being tossed under the bus big time, and they should really. It's like I said, I think here's another thing. I do not like to support 150 initiatives. So if you're saying to me, we are going to fix mental health and policing, and we're going to do it by way of introducing these 75 steps I'm like, dude, you're getting nothing done. You are getting nothing done. You don't have the manpower to do it. You don't have money to do it. It's unsustainable. It's unrealistic. Logistically, you can't do it. You can't control it. So how about this? Let's start with training our leaders, and in the training package, let's have, this is how critical incidents, when I speak to this loosely, because it could be a divorce. For those that have been through a divorce before, I would take this over a gunfight. I would take a gunfight over a divorce rather. Just because it causes an incredible amount of stress, and for those that have been through it, it's just unbearable. But then if you have a leader that doesn't understand, because they've never been separated, they've never been divorced, or they don't have kids in the mix or whatever, it could be easy to be like, well, I noticed that your performance has declined over the last whatever, here's some paper, or go out and pick up your socks and do things, versus having that self-awareness and the ability to approach that person and say, hey man, I've done some research and I've never been through a divorce myself, but I do know what kind of stress this can cause a person, and this is how I'm going to support you in these types of things. So if you were to teach that in leadership courses, when they come and lead people, they would do it in a more sensible way, which would prevent.
So I think, I mean, it's again, having seen the woo-woo aspect from a lot of the professors and coming from, like, you know, I don't have an extensive background in combat and use of force, but it's enough. And I've been trying to figure out how to communicate, bridge the worlds, right? So the strategy I've come up with recently is, are you familiar with the Jeff Cooper color code?
I'm not sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Jeff Cooper was an American Army colonel, and he was a pistol marksman. So if you're like in America, they're all like, "Yeah, I know Jeff Cooper." Like if you're in the pistol shooting world and you don't know that name,
you're talking about red, the state,
red,
orange,
white, yellow, orange. So I teach that, and then I started to realize, like, I've integrated. It's not from Krav. I just integrated it as a way to explain, you know, tactical awareness and stages. And then I realized this is our mental health too, right? So I'm not going to come and say you need to be mindful. And I'm like, no, just think of the color code. Because if I say mindful to a lot of, you know, macho guys.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, what does it mean?
They
and
write you off.
Yeah, so I'm like, okay, let's think tactical, guys, because everyone likes that. Or let's think combat. Like, if I have a threat, what stage am I in? Identified threat, it's orange, okay. And I'm in a fight, it's red. Oh, I'm like, guess what? That's no different than your nervous system, right? If you feel like you're in a fight, right, because you're getting a divorce or you're doing something else, think of a car now. How long can you stay redlined? And they're like, oh, you can't. And then it's like, now I'm connecting the tactical thing, because I'm like, so white, you're completely unaware. And I'll give the example sometimes. The person rocking down the cell phone, looking at it, well, tactically they're in white because they're not actually paying attention. Where's their nervous system at? Are they arguing with someone? They might be in red, so they're situationally in white, but their nervous system is actually in red. So I started using the same model to explain both nervous system and tactical situations to try and get it down, pare it down more to first principles. And then black, of course, is you're not doing fight or flight. You're doing something else. And whether that's good or bad. Yeah. I actually I say there's two, like, you ever watch the show Archer? Yeah. So like when Woodhouse, when his alleged lover dies and he goes on a rampage, I'm like, that's black. And in his case, he came out alive. So there are successful versions of that, or you just pass out and play possum, right? So
yeah, but luck is in the strategy.
Yeah. But I just found, how do I unify? The more we can unify the all the ideas, the easier it is to explain to people.
Couldn't agree more. I really like what you're doing. I think if I was to summarize it in two or three words, is basically that you're operationalizing wellness.
Yeah.
You know, like really is, and it's easy. It's easy to cross over.
Yeah. Well, it's easy when you understand, and I think that's the problem. A lot of people.
Sorry, it's easy to pass on.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand. So I talked to a therapist once on the podcast a while ago. I'm totally blanking on his name, James something. I'll reference him later. But he was talking about therapy for the military guys, and they respond so much better when the person leading the group used to be in the military, not only just in the military, but closer to what they did, combat soldier, versus some guy who comes from university, because now you can sort of connect. And I think that's the big problem, is the language that a lot of the academics are using, or the ideas they're pushing in mainstream, they don't translate to a lot of the worlds that they're trying to work in.
There's no relatability.
Yeah.
And that's some of the similar issues that are faced by you looking at NYPD, for example, and some of the cities' stringent anti-use of force laws, and some of the things they don't realize that what they're doing here is they're going to create much bigger issues in their city than
well, it's measurable now.
Exactly.
They're seeing the results.
100% it is. Yeah.
Crime went up 300%. No shock.
Shocking. I could have told you that, Kevin.
Yeah. Right. So that actually, moving into that, is like appropriate use of force, because we kind of alluded to it a little bit, but not in depth, because a lot of people. And you go country to country even. Like the podcast I released 2 weeks ago was with Adrian Vollman, who's the head of Krav Maga Kapap. He's very well known in the UK. And sort of their perspective, though similar, it's slightly different of what's appropriate use of force, because like their cops don't have guns. And to me, it doesn't make sense to me, but, you know, okay. So what, I mean, obviously it's you can go on for 1,000 years on this topic, but when and where, what is appropriate use of force in your eyes? It's a big topic, I know.
I mean, it's a big question. I mean, ultimately, an appropriate use of force is what would a person in a similar set of circumstances with a similar set of skill set and experience, one, right? And with their perception of the events and in their totality of their own circumstances, made a decision which would be deemed to be reasonable by a reasonable person.
Yeah.
It's like, so how do you do that? It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Because you have your own experiences. The lens that you put on when you look at a use of force is, and I'm not talking about completely outlandish things.
Yeah.
Let's not, fool ourselves into thinking that if
we're in the movie SWAT.
Yeah, somebody does something completely off that
Yeah.
everybody's looking at going, what the hell was that? And how do you even get to that?
Yeah.
Those are the separate issues. But if you're looking, you could have just as I was talking about the spectrum of personalities, you definitely have a spectrum of use of force.
Yeah.
So depending on the totality of your own circumstances and how the stress is affecting you and your abilities and how you can, it's just, if you were to completely brain dump everything that went through your mind
Yeah.
and the reasons why, and based on your experience and based on who you are as a person and the level of training that you have and all these other things, if you were to brain dump that on a piece of paper and somebody read it, they would go, yeah, under those circumstances, it's appropriate. I still don't think that I would have done it.
Yeah.
Maybe. But it's based on that, it's appropriate. So that essentially is the threshold. So there isn't a black and white answer to this.
Shocking, right?
It is. But what's interesting is, I think what we need to do is, and I think the public is a lot more understanding that we give it credit for. The problem is they're not being told. They're not being explained. They're not being informed, right? So if they were informed on how the decision-making process and the risk assessment and associated, use of force tools, of various tools, and how we're always a level above because we're not going to go toe-to-toe. Like, cops aren't paid to fight. They're paid to win.
Except those YouTube videos where they're like...
taking their belts off.
I mean, I think that's... We're in a place in society right now, we're having issues with our systems. And there's a clear problem with our systems. And I think, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of COVID, but what I'm seeing with the systems is they are taking that approach is, we don't need to inform you because you don't understand it anyway. Now, I don't know if I get in arguments on this. I'm like, listen, I understand the science just fine. So I know when you're telling me the truth and when you're not. I fully understand. That's the data changes and you need to pivot. That's not what you guys are doing. And I think that mentality of governments and decision makers applies to all these aspects is they don't want to inform people properly because, hey, if I have an idea of how things ought to be or I have a best solution and then I inform people and they're like, no, I don't think we should do that. That's what I think their resistance is. Their idea of a leader is not going to be panning out. Like democracy as a concept, like the Canadian system honestly is not working the way it's supposed to be because otherwise MPs or MLAs would vote with their constituents more rather than just ideologically with the parties. And you're seeing this, it sort of always goes towards, well, I need to do as a leader what I'm supposed to do. It's like, that's not what you're supposed to do. Here's more information. I'm going to go this way anyway, despite the change in information. And then I'll just blame it afterwards on the fact information changes. Like, I think it's just a huge systems problems and nobody knows what to do about it right now.
Yeah, it's when things start bleeding into political survival and you see it. And I was exposed to, a lot of that in the organization at times. And at times I'd be shaking my head big time going, what happened here? And you could tell there was political interference and all these things. So it's tough because then if you open on the flip side of that, if you open the floodgates and get everybody to give you an opinion, a decision will never be made. So it's tough, right? Like it's the
balance.
Yeah,
right?
it's that fine balance, but hopefully we're out of here soon, man, because I want to get these gyms open, get these mats full.
Well, I think they will. I said, I don't know if you're in that chat group where they got mad at me, but I was basically telling them what the timeline is going to be. They're like, oh, I'm optimistic we're going to open tomorrow. I'm like, guys, they're not going to open to end of summer. And I said that like 6 or 7 months, like illegally open for end of summer, like everything on paper the way they want it to be. No, you need to be optimistic. And I'm like, man, blind optimism is a waste of time, guys. And I could see what you could see. I'm talking about BC specific. I understand I think our politicians are weak in BC because they want to appease both sides. You can see I think they're following the science a little bit better here, but that's behind the scenes. But their policy is somewhere in the middle because you got the Karens on one side. And they just spent a whole year on the narrative about the vaccine. I'm like, okay, let's say the vaccine is the cure for all this, which, I'd flip a coin, whatever. They're not going to open up till end of summer based on the way they're behaving and the actions that they're taking. And everyone was like, no, how dare you think like that? I'm like, no, that's what's good. Look what's happening.
The amount of polarization that we have is completely asinine.
Yeah.
The reason why we have it is worse.
What's the reason?
I don't even know. I don't know what the reason is, but it's completely insane. It's like there is an actual inability to somehow look at things a little bit critically, but also, have the ability to say, okay, this is reasonable, and then look on the other side and say, this, unfortunately, also is reasonable. Yeah. And, okay, so where is the truth? Generally somewhere in the middle. And sometimes it's black and white, but it's quite rare. It's just having the ability to say on that side of the fence is, I don't even know why I call it that. I mean, it's not that it is that, but it's almost what it portrays. Over the last year or two, it's almost like you're on and they call it the right and the left, and I don't really believe in the whole concept.
Doesn't work anymore.
No, I don't believe in that, but I certainly believe in people being completely polarized, and it's either all of that, therefore I discount absolutely everything. You know what, to make it really, really simple, like imagine this. You have a workmate that you don't like at all. They're just, everything about that person bugs you. There is no single decision that day that a person does that you will stand behind.
We've all met one.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the case. Now, all that being said, if I take the emotions out of that, is there a possibility that at some point that day that person made the right call?
Yeah.
Likely, right? But you can't do it because you're viscerally against everything that person stands for, or the way to communicate it, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Man, it's...
Well, that's the thing. We're emotional. I always tell people, often when it comes to leadership, now you can tell me what you think about this, I think it's a myth it depends on the level of leader, that the leader always has to be likable. And now in a team situation, I think it's important that you're likable, but in a sort of like, if the next level up, the person who's making the really hard decisions, I find the leaders who want to be liked by everyone are the most incompetent leaders. But that contradicts a little bit. Well, the reason why they're doing that is that the whole thing we've been selling people in the last, 20 years is, right, you need to be liked and you need to do these. And then actually the algorithms will show if you're more likable and they'll click on it. And so we've sort of generated an idea of what a leader should be. But then you look at some of the most effective leaders in history, like Churchill, he was not a likable person. And we've convinced ourselves what good leadership looks like. Now, of course, again, I think there's some levels of leadership, more direct management with teams that you kind of have to get along. Otherwise, it's not going to work, especially when your life's on the line. What do you think of like what leadership and likability?
Well, I think those are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? So you have being likable as a leader, as in having PR abilities and the ability to communicate and not be a jerk, and wanting to be liked by everyone is two different things. Yeah, those are not they're not one and the same. Yeah, you can be a likable person with a minimum of PR abilities, and you can be somebody that's actually you're not portraying to be who you are. You're actually not being who you are. You're portraying to be who you think you should be. Yeah. So those are completely different to me. I think that most leaders would benefit from the ability to deal with humans.
Yeah. People skills.
Yeah. Right. Have some people skills. Yeah. I'm not saying they have to be extroverted. I'm not saying they have to go out for socials. I'm not saying any of that. But here's the other thing. If you're a really good leader and you're self-aware, what do you know? Yeah. You know that you're not that person. Yeah. If you're not that person, then who's that person? Yeah. Because you need that person in your organization. And that person needs to be working with you. Yeah. So you are the process owner. you are the decision maker, or you are the person that has the ability to shake and bake and make things happen.
Yeah.
But who's actually getting the buy-in?
Yeah.
Who's actually getting... So if I knew, and if I was that type of leader and I knew that I have a shortcoming in that area, I would get myself a right-hand person that has the ability to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And now what you have done is you've effectively recognized one of your own weaknesses. I'm not the most, publicly capable individual. And now I've hired someone that completes me, so to speak, by and to make sure that our people are taken care of the way they should, and my job as the process owner remains.
Yeah.
So
now, because that just sounds very much like, is this sort of where you're going with Raven Strategic, or with the sort of leadership advice, or what's? Because you're sounding like a Jocko. What is that company all about? Since kind of there.
Yeah, so I mean, Raven Strategic is basically an umbrella company, because I plan and I intend to do a whole bunch of things under that. And the reason why that is I'm kind of done with doing one thing. And I guess cops would say, well, you never know what your day is going to bring when you're in policing and all this stuff. But ultimately, what I don't want is to be pigeonholed into one thing. I want to do
boring, right?
I know. I want to do multiple things. And I have a skill set that spans on 20 years and 25 years that can really cross over a lot of those things. So there is, a coaching, mentoring piece, which is, it could have to do with resilience. It can have to do with, how do I get to somewhere where I want to be? How do I get to a specialty unit? How do I get to this corporate job? Or how do I lead this team? Or how do I get buy-in from my team? And I don't seem to be able to. And a lot of these people don't even have anybody to bounce stuff of. So it's like, if you're having issues at work right now, and say you're having interpersonal issues with someone and you have nobody to talk to, how does this not spiral out of control? Right? So my company basically has the experienced leaders in critical roles that basically have been there and have done that in times where, if they failed, people could have died or would have died, right? So it forced them to be that much better at this. So what happens is, you now get them in touch with, say, a new leader that just got into a company or just got a new role, or maybe it could be just a person that just has a leadership interest, or wants to be more resilient, or wants to prepare for the first response world, in whether it's getting experience coping mechanisms or whatever to deal with some of the stuff they're going to see or whatever. Like, all of this is there. But there's also, I obviously train thousands of athletes through my gyms over the years, which now I no longer have one. I have a jiu-jitsu, martial arts studio now, but for 10 years I had, multiple gyms. I trained thousands of athletes and tactical athletes and others to reach certain. And so that's another piece of the company that we offer. So if you have somebody that, say, wants to go to selection for a specialty unit, whether it's military or police, we can help develop or look at what they're doing critically and see, okay, this is where you could improve upon, or whatever the case may be. There's also the piece where we at. So there's the combative training as well, because when I was on my time on the team, I developed the combatives program for the emergency response team in the Lower Mainland here.
Like unarmed combatives? Or
that's right, unarmed. And I was in charge of not only putting it together, but also delivering it for many years. And I continue to do that. I travel to other teams to train their teams. And so what I like to do is customize things. And I think a lot of people are stuck in a box. So if you're bringing me, or if you're bringing a team into a unit where there's some specificity, such as maybe you're an undercover unit, or maybe you're a covert unit, or maybe you have certain challenges and you can't really communicate them to everybody, well, you have somebody that's been in, that has the credentials. I still have an active security clearance, those types of things, so I can get in and really, with you, cooperatively build a curriculum that fits your unit or yours. And so that's another important piece. Now, there's a safety aspect as well, so I can do safety plans, protection plans, self-protection plans. I can do, so right now I'm working on some projects for realtors, for example, like female realtors are obviously always at risk, and it's actually a lot more prevalent than most people give it credit for. And so for me, it's even though I am a martial artist, I understand that this is not where the war is going to be won. What we're worried about is situational awareness. What we're worried about is teaching them the skills that hardens the target, so that they're not selected as a target, and it leaves a very, very small percentage of attacks that would be ambushes, very small percentage, and that lessens the risk a lot, and how they can conduct their daily operations so that they maximize their safety. So that's another thing that my company does. I'm working on a documentary right now. I'm working on a series that should take off. So we're hopeful that it will. I'm working on a book right now that.
It's doing everything.
So I'm in a lot of things right now, and I really truly enjoy sort of the organic discovery of what Seb Lavoie as a grown man now is.
How old are you now?
As a grown 44.
44. Now he's a grown man at 44.
That's who I want to be when I grow up.
No, you never stop learning and growing, right? That's
absolutely
the healthy
not.
mentality. And then you think you do, and then you learn something new. Now, you mentioned, unrelated to your company specific, it's a victim, being a victim, right? And then,
sorry, where did I mention that?
Well, you were talking about how to make female realtors not a target, right?
Yeah,
Which
target. Yeah.
I know exactly where you're coming from. Now, I talk about this, and I was teaching on universities, and when I was at university, they did not like me because the way I'm talking about this stuff. I mean, obviously the students who stayed like me, but the university ID ethos, they're like, don't victim blame. And I'm like, well, I said in one of the last podcasts, and people don't like to talk about it. It's like, okay, so a woman got raped. Unfortunate. We don't want that to happen. It happened once. It came out of left field. It's, it was possibly avoidable, but now we have in a situation where it's happened to you multiple times. What are you doing decision-wise? But when you start to talk about that, people get very upset because the emotional aspect, right? Don't victim blame. But if you're situationally aware, you can't avoid everything. That's impossible. But you can make yourself not be a victim, man or woman, by how you act, by your decision-making. And talking like that, which I think is a more closer to objective truth than what's being pushed in the media, it's a hard sell right now because of the culture. So expand. It's a tough topic. Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So there's a police officer that I trusted immensely that worked with me. She's a black female with a PhD, and she's a sergeant in the RCMP. Yeah. And she's once said to me, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be dead?" Yeah. Because we can have these philosophical debate all day, and you can call it whatever you want, but ultimately, if it happens to you, you won't have the luxury of explaining what your thought process was or what you should or shouldn't have done. And I'm not responsible for you attacking me or whatever the case may be. Yeah. So. Yes, there are. I think in the spirit of self-awareness, we need to be teaching. So I think one of the ways around the problem, the issue, is to kind of teach them about self-awareness, so that we kind of lead them to water and let them drink. Yeah. Versus saying, okay, look, when you go in a party, Linda, those are some of the things that you should avoid. Yeah. Just so that somebody, and really, when you think about it, they shouldn't have to at all. They should be able. They should be able to do anything. Yeah. And suffer no consequences, especially not the types of consequences we're talking about. And we have a lot of teaching to do with boys. A lot of teaching to do with boys, and it should start way earlier. But I totally understand what you're saying. I just think that it's an absolutely unwinnable situation. So what we need to do, and Patton had a saying, the person who flanks first wins, right? So I try to not go, my approach to a lot of things I dealt with in my career has always been, I can flank around this problem. I don't need to go head on. Yeah. If we go head on, emotions are flaring, all this stuff. So I may achieve 60% of what my end goal was by going around, but I've still achieved the same thing because what I did is I poked them into doing an introspection on themselves on how to conduct business without having the conversation directly. And I think that having the conversation directly just shuts them down anyways, for the most part.
Emotional.
Unless there's caveat, and there has been people over the years that came to me and said, I need you to be 100%, honest with me about this, and there is nothing you can say that's gonna disturb me, and I need to change something, and I'm not sure what that is. And then I can go on, and the door's open, and it's completely different. I'm still obviously sensible. I just kick it open wider, but definitely I will have that conversation.
So
then.
don't blitz them, is what you're saying.
Dude. Like, when it comes to when things are provoking. So the best way to have a conversation is to have a conversation that is right. It's almost like running lactic threshold, where you're almost getting, your legs are jacked or whatever, but you can sustain that pace because you're just right on the line. It's kind of the same. It's like you can have that conversation and be right on the line and lead the people into basically come up to the same conclusion that you would have imposed upon them, but if they didn't do it themselves, they would have been emotionally reactive.
It's like a middle ground. It's like universities are such an easy thing to pick on, where they're so adverse now to anything they don't like that you can't even get to the middle ground to bring them to water, because they're just like, nope, my flag's here. I refuse to move. It's like, okay, you want to know why you have anxiety? It's because you're in a feedback loop, and you guys are just keep doing it to yourself.
But it's funny because university is such a microcosm of something that's completely foreign to life. Because as soon as you walk out of there and you start hitting, real life, so to speak, good luck. Nobody's gonna care.
That is what they've been saying for. Are you familiar with the Weinstein brothers? So Brett Weinstein was saying that, and he got killed metaphorically killed at Evergreen College, and he said that's what everyone's been saying. You just watch. And what we all thought was going to happen is all these people would be unhireable, but they've all got hired, and now they're in the corporate cultures. And you can see the corporations are like, they don't know what to do, because if they say the wrong thing, like the Coke fiasco, if you do or say the wrong thing, you piss off the left. You do or say the wrong thing, you piss off the right. And really all they want is for you to buy their product, and they're just screwing things up because they don't want to take a stand one way or the other or in the middle. And these people did end up in real life, and that's where we're at now. And it's like, how do we reframe the conversation back to the middle, where we can have a logical, how do we make everyone feel good while get productivity going, where we're not seeing spikes in crime 300% because your idea sucked.
And you have the inability to actually look at it and say, this went up 300%. Because I haven't heard any single conversation from anybody that was asking for the defund the police coming back saying, hey man, we defunded the police and the rates went up 300%. Maybe we should reconsider this.
Well, Biden administration is blaming it on guns, and they're like, even a reporter was like, are you sure it's guns? Like, they were pressuring them, like, of course. And then they did the stupid double speak, like, it's like, no, it's because you took away the punishment for those who are willing to play by their own rules. And then you let them run wild, because they will. That's like the predator-prey thing I'm always having to... It's like, for example, religion. I'm not a religious guy. I don't find I need it in my life. And I was one of those youth that rejected it. And then I listened to an argument from Ben Shapiro about why it's important. And really what it is people need something beyond themselves. Otherwise, and no matter what we think, we inherently revert to animalistic behaviors. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. It's not for me, but as long as they're not proselytizing me, I guess religion's okay. And there's a guy named Naval Ramakant who said, you either find God or have children, because both of those things will be something bigger than yourself, right? So if we take away personal responsibility, which a lot of these people are, and you don't have generally accepted rule sets that are reasonable, that everyone follows, because that's not what's going on, right? Everyone's got their own rule sets, and nobody has anything bigger than them. You see what happens, right? And that's, their ideas are fine. Like, trying to rectify that, quote, left and right is okay. the ideas that they have are okay. It's their application that's the problem. And then sometimes on the right, they don't want to change, or they're, for example, a lot of my friends or in the Krav world who are like, been police for a long time. Now, Vancouver is a very different story, but let's say you're in New York, or they still have that hardline anti-drug stance. It's like, guys, come on.
Not working, guys. We're not winning this war.
And it's like, you got to get people in the middle. Like, I was listening to the mayor of Austin talk about homelessness. He was on Joe Rogan. Good for him, right? You want to inform the public. That's how you do it. Mm-hmm. You got to get the homeless people off the street and give them no unconditional place to live. That seems to be consistent. But then the conservative side, which is totally fair, is what if they wreck everything? Now, his stance was, our homeless problem is it's a jobless problem, and they just need to get back on their feet. Versus a Vancouver homeless problem, which is a very big mental health issue. And people try to treat them the same, but they're not, right? Because if I give that severely mentally ill person a room, they're going to wreck it. Because they're going to, like, I've seen schizophrenics just destroy their rooms. And that's where the conservatives are like, that's not a good solution. Look what he's doing. And then the left wing are like, well, they're a human being too. I said I didn't say they're not, right? But we have to find the solutions for these problems, which is in the
it's so hard. It's almost like, again, in an ideal world, which is really, really difficult to do, but in an ideal world, we would provide enough information that we would hit the reasonable masses in a sweet spot. Where, okay, I have now been informed on both sides of this argument, and now my informed decision is this, and I understand what they're doing. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it works. But we don't have the ability to do that logistically, and it just would be, you couldn't possibly communicate, fast enough and have buy-in fast enough, and have people even have time in their own lives to dedicate to learning the things. That just wouldn't work. So it's a very interesting world that we live in, man. I'm actually kind of glad I spent 44 years already, so I don't have to be here for.
Well, if all hell breaks loose, you have the skill set to survive, so you're fine, right? That's what I tell people. It's like, it's not paranoia. It's this idea that society, it's normalcy bias essentially. It's, it was fine yesterday, it's going to be fine tomorrow. It's like, for all you know, we could be at war with China tomorrow. Like, it's like a thing, and then everything is to shit, and all your comforts are gone. And now, guess what? You don't have the skill sets to survive when the internet's gone and all that sort of stuff, because maybe an EMP goes off. And this isn't paranoia, right? The one I like to use is solar flares. We're like, that's never going to happen. It's like, it has, and it can, and there's nothing we can do about it. Are you prepared for that world? I mean, not like a hoarder prepper, but just like, hey, can you survive for 2 weeks on your own? A lot of people don't have that.
What if I said to you a year and a half ago, look, here's what's going to happen. If we are going to go underground, Venice, Italy, the water will be clear. Birds will be flying everywhere. There'll be nobody in sight in one of the most crowded or some of the most crowded spaces in the world, in Rome and otherwise in other countries. You guys are going to wear masks like we did during the Spanish flu in 1918. You will be unable to hug people you love. You will be unable to visit and all these other things. Like, you would have been accused of being a total doomsday prepper and Looney Tunes. I mean, it is absolutely foreseeable that something could go majorly pear-shaped. And one of the things is finding that balance, right? So I like the quote, I'd rather be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in the war.
Have the skills you need. Hope you never need to use them. Right. Make sure they don't go away.
But something else we just spoke about that I kind of wanted to circle back to. So here's why I really, really like Dana White.
Because he's like, I'm gonna.
No. I just. It's funny, man. Like, a lot of people don't like Dana, and I'm like, I just laugh all the way through his press conferences all the time because he's one of those very rare character that can actually put his foot down on things and suffer zero consequences ever, right? And probably because he's obviously brings an extreme amount of money to some big corporation. But the bottom line is, how does a guy like him so I guess there's two explanations to this. It's either the crowd that he attracts that's more conducive to have the ability to receive criticism and feedback and be told things the way they are without getting hurt, so to speak, or is just an incredible quality that he has to be able to say, put his foot down and tell you when something you're saying is completely off, and call people out on their BS, so to speak, and move on. I mean, he is one of the rare. When was the last time you saw a CEO of any company do that? Any company
to stand up and just say that.
Yeah.
It is very rare.
Without flipping your vest. And one of the things that Jordan Peterson says all the time is the day you flip your vest, not if you realize that you made a mistake and in light of the totality of the circumstances, you're saying, I changed my stance on this. It's not what he's referring to. Yeah. What he's talking about is when you are flipping your vest on account of people being offended by what you have said.
Now the camera's on, I'm going to be different.
Yeah, or I'm going to come back on something I said that I truly believed in because it offended people.
Yeah.
If you do that, you get it's very primal, because what happened to armies when the Romans got in, and what happens when things didn't go their way and they flipped and turned and beat hills. Yeah. Next thing you knew, everybody was chasing them, and its chase instinct kicks in, and you're just getting slaughtered.
Yeah.
There is a single time in the history of mankind that flipping your heels on a battle that you were losing paid dividend.
That's why they say apologizing to the woke mob is going to end your career. You have to stick to. I think with Dana White, this is what my thoughts. Yeah. He's genuine. If you start
that is correct,
that way, before and after you get famous, it won't affect your image. But if you're one of these people who put this fake thing to get into power, and all of a sudden the stress is kicking in, and now you can't handle it, and you have to drop the ruse, it's like relationships, right past the puppy dog phase. It's impossible to maintain. So if you get famous being genuine, I struggle with this because I'm extremely genuine. I'm very blitzkrieg people, right? That's probably where the issue is. And when I was growing up, it's like
I'm surprised you're using that analogy.
Yeah, it's fine. And we want to talk leadership. As a piece of shit as Hitler was, he was effective, right? I was taught growing up, they would be yourself. I just think it's the most ironic. Be yourself. Be an individual. Think for yourself. And now it's come full circle where if you actually do what they taught you as a child, the mob will come for you. You won't get the money. You won't get the connections, because I think humans have created, we all love entertainment, but we've created a false view of what it is to be human because of Hollywood or narratives or what relationships are. Cinderella effect, people think, it's lovey-dovey. I'm like, that's not what makes good relationships. And I've been pushing forever. We need to be honest a lot more. We don't need, white lies are fine. You just don't want to piss them off. They just but we're lying about what it is to be humans. You got some people who are like, no, humans aren't violent anymore. The suburb Karens, and how dare you do martial arts? That'll make you violent. It's like, what are you talking about? And then you got the other side, which is to screw up still in a country or wherever that's not great, and we sugarcoat what everything is. And if we're just honest, hey, people still kill each other, guys, and we can start to find solutions faster instead of lying about, stop electing politicians because they have nice hair or they say the right thing, because that's not who I want to be the leader. I want the person who can show they can execute. What's their voting record? What's their policy? Because we keep voting these douchebags in who just talk and look good, like our current prime minister, and they just destroy everything because they clearly don't know what they're doing. Right.
Funny story on that. The very first time I met him in person. We're working a close protection, and he comes over and shakes my hands, and I look over at the boys, and I was like, Jesus,
I gotta wash my hands.
No, it wasn't even that. It was the softest handshake you've ever been given. And I remember it. I went home that day, and I spoke to my daughters, and I'm like, okay, we're going to learn to shake hands today. So we don't want to be breaking people's hands, but we want it to be firm and say, I'm here.
Yeah.
And so I brought the girls over to the gym, and there was a lineup. This is pre-COVID, but there was a lineup after the BJJ class, and I had everybody shake their hand as as a practice run. Yeah. It was awesome. They looked at me like I was
That's
weird.
Good. Now, one perspective is, hey, that's chauvinistic, masculine bullshit. And the other perspective is, hey, do you know what one of the most consistent indicators for long life, it's good grip strength. Just saying, if you want to flip that.
I mean, fitness, and in the fitness world now, I mean, the benchmarks and the types of fitness that chicks are achieving on the daily in these functional systems is like, please, this has nothing to do with gender. Trust me. Evidently, it doesn't.
Well, I saw in Israel. I was in the infantry regiment Givati, and on our base, I'm totally forgetting their name. It was the combined combat unit, so men and women, right? And for anyone who doesn't know, you can shit on Israel you want. They have openly gay people in the army, and nobody cares. And if they do, they'll boot them. Like, they don't care. Of course, so that a lot of them go there. But some of the women,
they'll boot the people that make fun of them.
Yeah. If you're being a dickhead, they kick you out. So I had a couple, not directly, but a couple gay commanders. Nobody cares. Did really good at their jobs. That's all that matters. But my point was me just watching the male-female combat units, which took them a long time to have. Their main concern was if they get captured, they'll get raped, and that's why they were resistant for so long. But then they finally said, okay, fine. And some of those women were outperforming the men in infantry, and it's like, oh shit, right? They can do it too, guys.
the capacity of women to withstand pain and suffering, and I think we can attribute it to this little thing called, if men were giving birth, none of us would have babies. But their pain threshold, their pain tolerance, but I would say their willpower is it's unshakable. Like it's really, really tough to match. And now they're starting to really come out of that years of socially induced sort of pseudo boundaries, that we were keeping them in. Man, we're seeing some, and I think over time we'll see some serious changes in that area as well.
I think we'll find the balance eventually. I think the pendulum has gone a little way too hard one way to overcompensate for the years of not equalization, but I'm hoping it gets a little bit more in the middle.
Well, yeah, and I'm the same way. I agree with you in terms of so for me as a visible minority, one of the things that always created issues for me was the affirmative measures, right? Because discrimination is not a fix to discrimination. It's just not. So I know what you are doing in principle on paper, and it almost makes sense, but it doesn't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because the solution is human. It's a human solution, right? Educate you. I teach critical thinking, right? I think, was it Kevin Hart was talking about it. He's like, if we want to solve like the ghettoization of America, we need to teach financial literacy to people. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. Everyone needs to learn financial literacy. It's irrelevant of race or background. That's why wealthy stay wealthy. If they don't know, they just hire someone who can do it properly and hope they don't get robbed. But like that's why wealthy people do well. If they don't know, they can just hire, right? So if you don't have the money to hire, guess what? You got to learn financial literacy. Like my girlfriend is a financial planner, and she has been kicking my ass about smart financial decisions, which no one taught me, right? I'm trying to figure out, I think this will work, and then you wonder why it spirals. It's because, well, there's certain basics that if you're not taught, people think it's intuitive, but it's not, right? So if we want to solve a lot of these problems, it is education, not indoctrination, education. And someone asked me the difference. I think I said, well, education is I give you the tools and what we know now, and you figure out the rest later, versus this is what it is or else. And because I think a lot of people are confused on if you get called a racist for countering with evidence, that's indoctrination. That's not education.
100% is,
for example.
Yeah. But it also, it's an emotional response, which is such a funny, because we're a cerebral being, right? So we're emotional being, but because we have the ability to think with our heads, people think that the 10% of thinking that we actually do with our heads and is conscious in nature is actually the 90%, which isn't the case. So I don't know if that makes any sense. But basically, humans have 90% emotions and 10% conscious behaviors. But because the conscious behaviors are conscious, they think it's the other way around. But it's quite evident, as we see right now, that we're bundles of emotions that cannot be contained. And we're having a real hard time to see past our own emotions. And if we compound these issues by adding, it just gets worse. And that's exactly what happened during COVID.
Well, I think there is so much to unpack. First of all, because I was listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's like, we use more than 10% of our brain. Stop you.
Sure.
So it's a metaphor, right?
Yeah, of course it is.
But
yeah.
Have you ever read the book Dune by Frank Herbert?
I have.
So it's
excellent book.
the best book ever. The Bene Gesserit, these female-led sect, is about they view all sentient beings as animals until they can show they're human through the ability to control emotion and pain. And I think in human evolution, we're getting to that point where we are finally, hopefully, maybe coming out of being animals. We're still there. You know, a lot of religious people are like, no, we're not animals. We're here. But I'm like, we're still stuck to the fight or flight mechanism. We don't have conscious control over a lot of it. We're some people like Wim Hof. They've hacked their body, and getting the whole collective to that next stage is, I think that's kind of where we're at. And you're dragging some people kicking and screaming while other people are just going, while completely uprooting everyone's lives. And then the emotional animal. I can't draw. If I could, I would have done this political meme where it's like a leftist or a progressive, like dragging and going forward and being held back by a rope in one frame, and then the next frame, or then they're like, why won't you progress forward? And then they're being weighed back by a conservative who's saying, I'm all fine for going forward, but there's a cliff in front of you, right? And that's, if we're not careful, we can go off that cliff if we just veer right and get the right mindset and realize we are becoming more now. We're still animals. You got to accept that, but we might be moving towards the next stage soon. And I think that's why there's so much confusion and nobody knows what to do with it, because the systems, as we were sort of alluded, or I think they're broken, not because they're broken, but because they're the wrong systems for now, and we need to change. And it's getting people to do that.
Well, I mean, change is uncomfortable. Things that are uncomfortable are deadly, as far as human primal, so if you were in a cave and you're walking out of your cave and you're comfortable in walking out without scanning, you get taken by a T-Rex or some sort of saber-toothed tiger.
Don't do that.
Yeah. So from a primal, but I believe you are correct, and I'm hoping that's actually the case, that we're moving to the next step of this, because there's two choices here: we get better or turn this place into a parking lot.
Yeah. No, I was just saying. I was talking to someone years ago. I'm like, the future is obviously humans are drawn to cities. So that's going to be hard to get away from a sustainability perspective, but we need to make the cities green. I was talking about green architecture and how eventually they're going to have high rises with like greenhouses all in them just for sustainability. I was like, no, that's crazy. And now I start seeing it. There's an architect in Taiwan that's putting one up, and I'm like, it's the innovators and those who are different who will drag everyone forward, but it needs to get social acceptance without pissing them off so much that they get killed.
So one of the problems that I see with change, like critical change that is much needed, is that generally we wait way too long to realize that it's needed, and we need to have some serious adverse consequences to the current system so that we move on to the next one. And I just think that it would be nice to consider things earlier and versus waiting for the apocalypse to hit before we make a call on certain things.
Well, I mean, that's about the data, right? If they're more transparent with the data and you teach people more, right? So like, environmentalism, I think environmental alarmism is insanity. As in, we're all going to die. And I'm like, you need to stop doing that. But I know what they're doing. They're using fear. The Green Initiative now is moving forward just for the same reason the space race is moving forward. Because Elon Musk said, you guys aren't doing shit, hold my beer, fuck you. And all of a sudden, they're like, oh, he's succeeding. Like, I remember NASA guys talking about, and Neil deGrasse Tyson is being a bit of an idiot about this. It's like, oh, you need NASA, you need the government. Nobody else can do it. There's no incentive. Nobody. And it's like, what have you guys been doing for the last 20, 30 years? You've become complacent, and someone came out of left field, said, you guys aren't doing it, I'm going to do it. And now all of a sudden, all the car companies are going electric. We've had the technology for a while. They're all going electric. It just takes that wave, because he got what Elon did was he made it cool first so that the public wanted it, and then he started going, right?
Yeah, man, it's incredible, and it's funny from the corporate world. So one of the big differences between the world I was in, which was the policing world, and the entrepreneurship world, or the world that I'm in currently, and what I'm seeing from my friends that are business people that are very successful, is that they will go on completely outlandish, claims, and they will essentially, because if I look at it objectively, in my line of work, risk assessing had to do with physical harm for the most part, and then a little bit of organizational harm, but physical harm mostly. And if you have to do that, then you can't really gamble too much on certain things. But if you're in the corporate world and you have a certain amount of money set aside to do something, and you want to do a completely outlandish project, and it doesn't pan out, nothing happens. You move on to your next project, and one of them will actually pay dividend, because you can hit by volume, and you can actually get to a point where you're successful with something. So one of the big differences is, for me, every time one of my business partner or mentors was saying, you should do the A, B, C, and D, I'm always like, well, this, actually I would need blah, 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 and this I would need. And so I became my own disabler. And business people are very much not like that. And business people such as Elon Musk are even sort of less, what's the word? On a leash, right? Like he just
does whatever he wants.
Yeah, and then he gets to a point where his wealth is allowing that as well, and then there's less risk, and the less risk he has, the more risk he can take. And it's an incredible thing, because we're gonna have to keep up, man.
Well, that business mindset, like, it's a balance, because like I've always been like, I have this idea what I want to do, I'm just gonna do it, and I got mad at anyone who said you can't do it. And what I realized is, I may have been right, but I needed the advice. You need the sort of, this does work, this doesn't work, right? That mindset alone, that's why you need the tools to do it, right? If you, an underestimation on my part was how popular Krav Maga was going to be in Vancouver. So I did the classic overexpand, over in leverage, overgo, thinking if I build it, they will come, without realizing there's no demand, so I should have kept it small. Right now, it took me years to recover from that. Actually, COVID has helped me. I'm capitalizing on it, I think, pretty well. I think I'm going to come out on top. But it's like, if you don't have that one success to make up for all the failures, that's why a lot of people crash. Like, we always like to take the Elon Musk. Well, he's the one who succeeded. Right now, you look at angel investors. They invest in 10 people knowing one of them will make their money back, knowing that everyone else is going to fail. And that's like the hard reality of success, is a lot of people failed for everyone's success. But as an individual or a business owner or anything, is you just learn from it. So successful iterations. Now, not everyone can be Bill Gates, and not everyone can be Elon Musk, and people need to stop selling that, because most people can't. You just need the iterations of yourself to be the better version of yourself.
Sure.
And convincing people that's the hard part a lot of the time, because they are pigeonholed in the mindset, right? So I know one area you're probably going to be working is that mindset, right? If I was to take someone with like that's just struggling mentally from just lack of success, how would you approach that? Whether it be business or otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends what the culprit is, right? Like, are they responsible for their own demise, or is there a set of circumstances that's pit them against overwhelming odds? And those are very different. What are their goals, and how have they gone about reaching those goals, or operationalizing their abilities and their skills and their knowledge? And are they, sometimes bouncing something off of somebody that's outside the realm of what you are doing is really providing that critical oversight, or that bird's eye view that you are no longer, because you're completely ingrained in what it is that you are doing. And I find that a lot of the times I will talk to people and go, you got too much on the go. You have, you need to, and not to paraphrase Jocko, but I will. I mean, it's not a concept that Jocko invented anyways, but prioritize and execute. You're not prioritizing and executing. You're kind of looking at life through a strainer, and you take a flashlight, put it through a strainer. Your rays are going in all kinds of direction. What I need you to do is laser focus on something, and having the awareness that the other things are there, but you need to pick something and pick at it, and then make an actual decision. So a lot of the times people are not self-actualizing because they just want to do too much at once.
I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, and sometimes having that conversation and say, look, man, you're doing everything right, and you're full of drive, you're full of determination, you're super solid individuals, but you're taking too much on.
Yeah.
And what you need to do is make a decision on what your next step is and focus on it.
Yeah.
You know, and I did the same with the organization. I mean, we had initiatives for something called, say, Division 150, which was essentially it's supposed to be a better leadership and a better organizational model. You know, it encompasses, you know, our people and taking care of our people, the leadership, the stewardship, and all these other things. There's a bunch of other things, but I went to a meeting. I went to a meeting in Ottawa, and I basically looked at the provinces were bringing in what their initiatives were to make things better in their own province or their own division, and all of them had 100 initiatives. And I'm like, excuse me, ma'am, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Like it simply isn't. It isn't going to work because you can't have 100 things you want to do and get any done. Like it just and then you have shifting priorities and competing interests and all these other things. It's just not going to work. So sometimes it's just a matter of somebody bounces something off of me and we have that conversation, and the very first realization is that they're on the right path. They're just taking too much on.
Yeah.
So it could be as simple as that.
Now that's interesting because like Jocko often talks about decentralization, and like the modern trend is cryptocurrency's decentralization. How much of that is in it's too big, too many voices, too many cooks in the kitchen, and if you decentralize and give the right leadership, right? That's sort of like Jocko's thing, right? Is that sort of in the line with what you saw, that it's just too much trying to control everything at a too big a level?
Yeah. There's no question that's precisely the biggest issue that we had, was a lack of decentralization of command. Yeah. There is no question. So, but here's where this gets interesting. So if you are putting people in positions that you trust them to be in, then give them power to go along with the trust, right? Because you can't give responsibility without power. Yeah. Because you're basically setting your people for failure. You're setting them up for failure. There's be no way to lead that way. But also, you need to understand that you don't have the ability to lead across the country. Yeah, like you just don't. Your sphere of influence and your span of control is about 5 people. Yeah. So take care of your 5 top people. They take care of their top 5s, and they take care of their top 5s, and it goes down the chain. What you need to do is establish the culture in this organization. Yeah. That's your job. But the job of like making decisions that are relevant to their specific province, in taking into consideration the totality of the circumstances, has nothing to do with you. Yeah. And things are going to be different depending on where you are and who's making the calls. And not all calls have to be the same to be right. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like the current gun situation in Canada, where they're making laws for Toronto's needs.
Shots fired.
Yeah, and it doesn't work. It just is insane about and they're just ramming it through for the sake of political. I feel like this is why Canadians and individuals feel helpless, or an employee feels helpless when they're like, you're not listening to me. Oh, we really care about everyone's voices. Hey, our entire group of people is being ignored. Hey, here's some evidence. No, you don't understand what you're talking about, because I need this to happen for my game. And Toronto votes basically make or break the election a lot of the time. Montreal votes too, which is in our country is alienating Western Canada. At what point do we break up because they're being too centralized in their approaches consistently? It's the same. It works at all levels, right? Mm-hmm. You just piss everyone off if you're too far removed from the people you're trying to help. And I think Canada is actually a textbook example of why not. You need to decentralize a little bit more. It's falling apart a little bit.
No, I totally agree. I think you're absolutely right. Being from the East Coast myself, the political scene is pretty much one of the reasons why I wanted out. And
it's crazy.
There's a lot, and it was then too. Yeah. This was with the 101 law or whatever it was, where everything had to be in French and whatever, and it's just. it was completely insane.
Yeah, they're doing it again right now.
And in the 70s, it was the FLQ, and it literally was like war in Quebec.
So my mom's from Montreal.
Yeah.
She left. She was not Francophone, though. I never learned French. My grandfather spoke French because he grew up on the streets in like the 1930s. So
on the streets?
Yeah, and it was a little bit different back then because I think his father died in the pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic, whenever that was. Yeah. So then he ended up on the streets. And I never learned the French, unfortunately. But she left for that reason because she's much more English speaking. She's like, I don't want to deal with it. So I'm out, right? And it's that, that's interesting, like, culture. I talk about it in self-defense because it matters. If you don't understand the culture you're dealing with, you're going to either piss them off or it's not going to come off well. And then we have in Canada the idea of multiculturalism, and I'm not sure the Canadian idea of multiculturalism is actually working because all I see is a lot of divided groups that are pretending to work together but doing their own thing, really. Like in Vancouver, Richmond, it's like predominantly Chinese now, and you meet teenagers there who they basically are acting like it's in Hong Kong. It's like I don't even feel like I'm in Canada sometimes. And some people are like, "Oh, that's good, diversity's good," but it's like everyone's if you go too much the other way, it doesn't work either, right? You
know what's funny is and I let me disclaim this before I unpin a grenade and toss it in a room full of babies. Yeah. But I was married to a Chinese woman. My current girlfriend is Chinese. My daughters are Chinese, both of them. Well, half Chinese, both of them. Well, actually, half. All the other things I'm mixed with as well. But I can. One of the things that's never ever spoken about is how actually inherently racist a lot of the Asian cultures
really
are. and it's interesting, and this is coming from my wife, she my wife used to be told by her parents, if you do this or if you do that and you're being a bad girl, I'm going to drop you off at a black man's house. Right?
That's ridiculous.
And what's funny is, so I heard that the first time, and of course it turned out to be a non-event 20, 30 years later, because I was in the family and they accepted me just fine. But what's interesting is then I move on with another girlfriend, which shall remain unnamed, and she had the exact same experience. Her parents were also Chinese, and they were telling him the same thing. So and then you have the and this transcends the Chinese. A lot of cultures are doing that. It's like, this is not racism.
Every culture is racist.
This is not racism. This is cultural.
Yeah.
We want blacks with blacks, like say if a black person says to their kids, I want you to be with a black person because it's going to be easier for you, blah, 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 or this is a culturally acceptable practice. Or if the Chinese say we want the Chinese to marry the Chinese or the East Indian to marry the East Indian, it becomes it's no longer a racism issue, it becomes a cultural issue. No. That's not a cultural issue. That's what racism is. Like, it essentially is.
Do not be with this other group. Yeah, I mean, I'm dating Chinese too. I mean, I grew up in Richmond. It's inevitable. But that, that's the interesting. Like when I was in Israel, so you have Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, Mizrahi Jews, Ethiopian Jews, and then Russians who were sometimes not even sure if they're Jewish or not. They just used it as an excuse to get out of Russia. But so I was in a situation when I first went to Israel, and I grew up here, like culturally it's diverse, and like Asians and Indians and all that. And, if I'm attracted to a girl, it doesn't matter what background they are. And I'm like, oh, these girls are really pretty in this city. And someone close to me was like, oh yeah, but they're Mizrahi Jews. They're not, you can't do. And I'm like, what the fuck? I thought we were all Jewish. And you realize that it's just a human thing. It has nothing to do with one group or the other, right? That's why then the conversation right now in the media public is disturbingly silly, because they're not being honest. It's like what I was talking about. Can we please acknowledge that everyone, every culture, every group is racist to some degree?
There is no question. I mean, there is no question that that's the case. And ethnocentrism is real. Thinking that somehow the group that you belong to somehow is superior, either genetically or
that's where you get real dicey.
I know, and it's an incredibly dangerous prospect. And it's completely flawed. It is completely flawed. There's no question. There's no question about that. But we need to be, when we address racism, it needs to be across the board. I don't want to hear things such as "this is not racism; it's cultural." no, actually, this is straight up racism, and we need to address it.
In my culture, it's like, yeah, you're racist. But it's interesting. Like, I think if we want to get down to first principles, it's consistently the same problem. It's like understanding and having the knowledge is so, like, Chinese girl I'm dating, you have a lot of conflict early on because you're butting heads. Like, no, it needs to be done like this, and you're like, why does it need to be done like this? I do it like this, and then. And at least if it works towards a healthy relationship, doesn't always, of course, then you realize, oh, I like that. That works better. And, oh, this way works better. And then sometimes you get in the arguments, why aren't you doing it like that? It's like, well, no one's ever shown me to do it. Well, it's common sense. No, it's not. Like, my family doesn't do it like that. And it's the same for, I think, dealing with, like, COVID or dealing with these issues. It's like, okay, well, what's on the table? What's the actual kind of truth? It's like, are we doing this thing just because that's what we were told, or are we doing this thing because it's the best solution to the problem? Because humans have a tendency to go to uncomfortable, right? It's actually, I think that sort of decision-making process in the human condition is universal, and that's where we need to fix it, right? Are we solution-oriented or are we comfortable-oriented? And it's not, too many people think they're being solution-oriented, but they're not. Like the relationship analogy is like, we both want to eat. We don't want to have an argument trying to eat about the right way to cook this thing. So you have to come with the workable solution. Mm-hmm. Oh, your way is better for this, but my way is better for that. And we just didn't know, right?
We're all about relationship, man.
Yeah.
We're all about it.
Yeah.
Like, you can't navigate this place and this, do we even know what we're doing here?
Sometimes no. I think that's our politicians need to admit where I didn't know what I was doing.
No, I meant as humans. Like,
yeah. It's a good question.
Does anybody know?
What was I listening to? There was talking about John. If you listen to the John Danaher podcast he's been doing recently, the one he did on Lex Fridman, just the whole. What it means to be human and purpose, and you're seeing that pop up everywhere now. Is again, we're at that transition phase, and where we seek purpose, and too many people don't have purpose, and they don't know what to do with themselves.
I don't know if it's purpose that's missing, or it's the credit they want to take for the said purpose. So one of the things that Lex Fridman had said that was quite interesting in that podcast, and he's a very smart guy, and I respect him a lot. Was so he asked John, does it worry you? And I'm gonna butcher this a bit, but
they said a lot. It's hard to remember.
Yeah. Does it worry you that when you die, your legacy dies with you, and that essentially everything you brought to the table is gone with you? And I'm gonna say that for a guy that's as smart as Lex Fridman is, that's a gross oversimplification. Like, think of it this way. Do we care about the good that we bring into this world, or do we care about taking credit for the good that we brought into this world? Because those are two different concepts. Because I can say beyond, I think a reasonable doubt that something that Julius Caesar did probably is part of my DNA today, right? And so if I bring good and positivity in this world and I end up dying, how many lives have I affected? How many lives are those lives affected? How many lives those lives have affected? So then, basically, there is a proliferation of what you brought and the positivity that you have brought, and you don't know where this may manifest itself. It could be in thousands of years. But to think, so the issue and the prospect and what Lex was saying essentially is, people will not know that this came from John Danaher, therefore John Danaher is dead. So we are now no longer talking about purpose. We are now talking about purpose with the intent to take the credit for it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it makes complete sense. It's have you ever seen Futurama, the TV show? Yeah. So there's that one of my favorite episodes where Bender meets God, this galaxy supercomputer thing, and he's like, you've done things right when no one's really sure you've done anything at all. Right now, humans love to measure stuff. So that's sort of the argument I got about code. Is I know there are people who cannot understand science without rigid scientific method and anything out those parameters. They just, nope, that's not science. But it's like, we're humans. The human factor is complicated. When you try to study psychology, there are so many factors you didn't think to measure which are affecting what you're doing, and you almost need to take a little bit more relaxed approach to some things sometimes, because, you know, if legacy to you is you're remembered, but really some unnamed person actually changed the world and stopped a world, like this Russian submarine commander who most people have no idea who it is other than historians, and yet he stopped the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? That could be seen as like progress, and if you're focused on my name, my legacy, then you might be putting your energies the wrong way, versus the goal is the human factor, which is what's the next for the species, which I actually, you know, listening to a lot of these intellectuals, they are tackling the problem from the human, what's best for the species, they don't always understand that like 95% of humans are not in that mindset, and they're making decisions based on that mindset for people who are still, I just want to get fed today, right? I just want to do that. And it's like ethereal ideas for a lot of people, and they don't even know, because they haven't tried to teach them these concepts, because you won't understand it anyways. Try people, right? Mm-hmm. They'll get it or they won't. Mm-hmm. And then but you want to get more people up, so you need to have a more open-minded approach to changing the perspective of what is our end goal, right? So some people may never get out of the end goal of, I want my name on everything, like Trump. Sure. Right? That's pretty much his end goal. Well, I think it's more to that, but you put your name on everything for a reason, versus someone who doesn't want, a lot of these scientists that don't want credit for anything, but they're the ones who actually did the work, right? It's purpose in human. It's a complicated question.
It's complicated, and what's also making things, a little bit that complexify things even more is that if the purpose is fulfilled, so to speak, a lot of the times they run ragged, right? Yeah. So you look at Rome, for example. There's a series right now on Netflix. I can't remember. It's called Rome something or other.
There's a bunch. Yeah,
it's so good, man. Yeah. It's so good. It's just you see these leaders, and some of them are excellent for the longest time, and then they all of a sudden turn into, I'm going to put my name on everything and turn this place into
more.
Yeah, and it's that greed that kicks in, and it has to be kept in check, and that's when accountability is critical, and giving too much power to one single person is very, very dangerous. Yeah.
There is something that's said for term limits that could be a big part of America's problem, is that people are in power way too long, and they're just corruptible by their own ego. Like, people mean well. They don't realize. Let's pick an easy one for BC people. Is, COVID regulations. They banned indoor dining except for indoor wine tastings. That's an oddly specific thing. Then you find out the person who made the decision owns a winery. Oh, no, but that has nothing to do with the winery during COVID. That is clearly a biased decision, guys. There's no other way to put that. No, that's fine. And then you start realizing that there's some ego, even those who mean well. Like, I think she means well in BC, but it's to pretend like that doesn't exist. And when you call them on it, they just ignore it. It's like, maybe it's time, when this is all over, you should step away from this job now, because you've hit that point where you're making decisions like that. It's like, okay, we're done.
Hey, man, when you work the government long enough, nothing surprises you.
Yeah, you just slip stuff in. On that, it's mob mentality and purpose and meaning and fear and all that. It's Doug Ford, whichever the Ford is in Ontario, he gave it away. He said, if I change my tune now, it's political suicide. And I'm just like, motherfuckers. Like, there's nothing to do with truth in my health anymore. Mm-hmm. And we stopped being that a long time ago.
But you want them to be that dumb. Yeah. So they actually speak out their intent. Right. Because the evil you know is better than the evil you don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I want them to accidentally admit
100% I do.
Stupidity, why they're making these dumbass decisions.
Our Prime Minister did a much better job. He just doesn't answer questions at all. He just does it. Like, I was watching this interview where they were questioning him on something for 20 minutes, and he just would not answer it. And he never did. But what's more interesting is that the people conducting the interview are so used to him not answering questions that they're actually accepting of that now.
Yeah.
They don't even push. Yeah. It's like they'll push for a little bit, and then he'll skate out the back door 2 or 3 times, and they'll just move on. And I'm like, somebody get up and ask him that question again, and tell him to answer it, and to stop skating around in a circle.
Or get him to call you a racist. That's when you know you got him.
But you know what's going to happen, though? Like, that person does not come back to the next press conference. The door's locked, right?
Which is insane.
It is just, man.
He actually did. He got caught going into politics. He did that recently where he was saying that conservatives are he's going off about there. Can we what was it? He basically used the anti-Asian hate thing and called the conservative racist. Oh yeah, they were asking why the fuck they had a Chinese national in a level 4 lab without security clearance, and he just turned around and said, "You're racist." And then all the conservative MPs who were Chinese were like, "What the fuck are you talking?" They didn't say it like that.
Mm-hmm.
But are you crazy? Answer the question. What decision making did you allow someone who doesn't have clearance in? Well, they were escorted by the RCMP, and they don't belong there. You're a racist. Oh my god.
Yeah, he's a next level cat.
Yeah.
And
they just pushed back the election again. I fucking want the election. Come on.
Well, he's got beautiful hair anyway.
I know, right? I met a woman in a bar who said, "I just got a divorce. I always voted conservative because I don't care about politics. That's who my husband voted." And I'm like, she's like, "I voted for him." I'm like, "Okay, well, what's your reason?" She said, "He has nice hair." I'm like, fuck.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he got elected.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Now, on the contentious topic, because we've been alluding to it.
Sure.
Guns.
Yeah.
Now, I grew up in Canada with parents who are not interested in it. My dad's from England, mom's from Montreal. They don't care either way. But I didn't grow up with it, as opposed to a lot of Canadians who it's hunting culture or whatnot. And I was terrified of them. And then I went and got my PAL, which I can now teach the course.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, right. To learn about it, have a basic knowledge of guns before I go join the army, because I'm like, this makes sense. And then, as most people in Canada find it, is, oh, these laws are much stricter than I thought they were. And you're like, why? Oh, I know why. You're watching American news. And then most Canadians, when they actually find out, are like, oh, can we relax the laws a little bit? But then you hear the conversation in the public. The media is actually turning around a little bit on this because they're making too many outlandish claims, so the media can't ignore it anymore. So what are your stance on guns, Canada, and people having them, or thoughts at least?
Oh man,
I'm gonna trap you on this.
Yeah, response. I'll start with this, and I've said this on another podcast before. Guns, if they could be completely disinvented, I would vote for it 100%.
If no one has guns, then
we are
we
are talking about completely. They never happen.
Yeah,
it's never. It would be the absolute best solution.
Mm.
But regulating guns for law-abiding citizen is not going to impact. From a data perspective, it's not going to impact crime because these guys are not using registered firearms. They are not complying with any of the regulations. They are not acquiring their firearms legally. They are not storing them properly. They are not doing anything they're supposed to do. Right? Evidently, they're criminals, and they're using their guns for a nefarious purpose, and there's nothing we could do to change that. The Board of Police Chief has been including the RCMP, has been very vocal about saying that there is no data to support a gun ban. There just isn't.
Which is good for them.
Yeah.
But that's where they stop, unfortunately.
Well, no, but here's where the issue is, and here's where the contention is. The RCMP makes a recommendation. The political power to be are held accountable by the public. This no longer has anything to do with policing.
Or stats already.
No, we've given them, and I say we. I wasn't involved in that, but we know, and this is not just the RCMP. It's pretty much every other police chief in the country has said we know that the data doesn't support the ban. We know it doesn't. Now, if we could take all guns away and nobody had them, by all means, go ahead and do it. But it's not going to happen. That's never going to happen, especially not in a country like the States where they have 26 million or something. It's stupid amount.
More than that, probably.
So, but our regulations in the country here are stringent. Would I want to see, say, a concealed carry type world?
Hard to say, right?
Yeah, then you're starting to run into issues of training, competence, these types of things. So, and there's some recreational shooters that are incredible shooters, and obviously they would continue to be incredible shooters, and they would be safe in the handling of their firearms and responsible. But there's also so many other types of people that shouldn't have guns. They shouldn't have a pen, let alone, let alone guns. So, I just think that from a recreational standpoint, having the ability to continue shooting for recreation as well as shooting for sustenance, like fishing, hunting, and all these other.
Which apparently is no longer considered essential in British Columbia under the COVID rules.
Of course,
but okay.
But that's what they did. They basically circumvented the whole process by just changing the parameters, right? But this is one step towards getting all those guns away from us, and I do believe that if this government remains in power, or if a government remains in power,
I'm moving to Texas.
Yeah, but see, that sounds like a great idea until everybody's walking around with 4 guns, and too much of anything is like.
So I disagree that we should never have had guns, and here's why. Because I see it as a force equalizer with the wealthy who held power forever, and I think if guns hadn't have been a thing, we would still have kings and queens, because when everyone's trying to survive, you don't have the time for the training, and there would have never been that sort of time where it's like, okay, now they don't have absolute power and force. Then you saw a bit of chaos, like early London or in the industry, you saw a bit of chaos, like cowboy days, where everyone's reestablishing and the guns were necessary for that. And then you realize, okay, we need some civilization, so we brought back organized policing, right? And you need that balance. There needs to be a balance of the governments and those who have use of force, like legally allowed to, know that they can't go totally crazy because the human condition, which is to assimilate power and keep it. And I think when done correctly, it just is a reminder, hey, you can't just take over and do what you want and be a dictator, because what do they always do? Get rid of guns.
Yeah, right? So I agree with you, except for one little variable, is that they had guns.
Yeah.
If we disinvented them, they wouldn't have them.
Possibly. But I mean, just think of it. I'm thinking about a training. Maybe I didn't explain it.
Yeah.
So a long time, and it could be because technology wasn't there.
Yeah.
If I'm a peasant and I work on a farm, all my time is towards just surviving. Well, who learned use of force? It's the knights and nobles and wealthy people who basically could train all day because their money was fed for.
Sure.
So what guns does is it reduces the amount of time and expertise I have to put in, because, no matter how, John Danaher talked about this, physics matter. If you're tiny, but then that knight is huge and you both have training, he's going to win most of the time. Well, what a gun does is say, yeah, take my property. Try. I don't care how much training you have. And so that's what I mean by it's a force equalizer. Is because if only the wealthy can get the skills to defend themselves, which, could be different now with technology, it sort of was a necessary to force the hands of those with power to realize it's only a matter of enough people storming their castle with enough technology that they can't do that anymore. So then they have to learn to play nice. Right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Was there ever a time in history though where peasants ended up having guns and taking over and really? I mean, evidently there were some uprisings and there were some. But was there ever a time where this was the critical factor where they actually, because if you're peasants right now and you don't have the money for training, you don't have the money for anything, you also don't have the money for guns. You likely don't have any of that. So I don't know. I think I don't know. I can't answer that. It's way beyond.
What if machine?
Well, yeah, exactly. But what if we all work together? And okay, so give you an example of this. ISIS. So ISIS was, I believe this was in Syria, but don't quote me on this. I believe it was in Syria. They went to university, lined up the kids out near a cliffside, and they basically shot them one at a time, basically for days. So much so that ISIS executioners were getting cramps in their hands, and you see them on video shaking their hands before taking another shot. That's how bad they pull the trigger so often. And guess what the next person did? They took a step forward. And they took a step forward. And they took a step forward. And it didn't matter. They shot them for 3 days straight. And every single one of those people took a round to the melon thinking that maybe they were going to survive this, because maybe they were going to change their mind when they get to them. Or didn't have, or was just, seized by fear or whatever the case may be. So now, are we looking at something where weapon would have changed something, or we just have, or people getting together is really what's the powerful
So perhaps,
equalizer.
mob mentality, victim mentality
Sure,
sort of
sure.
coalescing is
Absolutely.
what allows this nonsense to happen.
That's what happened in Quebec. That's
Yeah.
what happened in Quebec. So there was a biker war. I used to work in clubs back then, and it was
Fun days,
They
right?
they were wanting to shoot each other with rocket launchers in the club lineups and do all this stuff. One day, and there was no public outcry whatsoever.
Yeah.
The bikers are just there, and they've killed a bunch of people accidentally, but whatever.
Yeah.
And eventually they hit a kid, and when they hit that kid that died, it was 8.
Flips the switch.
It flipped the switch. When it flipped the switch, it took a year from the date of him passing away to the regulation being completely changed, where these guys couldn't even hang out together with more than 2. They couldn't wear their colors. They couldn't do this. They couldn't do that. So there was basically what happened is finally people got together and basically went after what they should have had to begin with, which is their government protecting them, against. But it's very difficult for anybody to afford that protection if the public themselves don't think they need it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a vicious circle. It's like they have to be dead afraid, as I mentioned earlier, before they come to the conclusion that this is a much needed solution, and then they gotta all get together and go to the front to require those decisions to be either overturned or implemented.
Yeah. Now we kind of went off topic there because I want to get back to the gun specific thing, but because you will have more intimate knowledge than I, for sure. The same thing kind of happened here a little bit with the Series 6 thing, right? Where all of a sudden, hey, we had all these gang problems. Everyone was kind of just tolerating it, and the Series 6 murders happened, and boom, you guys, I'm sure you were involved, kicked some doors down. And then even Hell's Angels were like, you little fuckers ruined this for everyone.
Yeah, I was, heavily involved with the Series 6 in a variety of different capacity, but that was horrible. That was predictable. Yeah. But there is no way for us to get buy-in, because
from the public,
it's extremely difficult, and it's just not us. It's denial is not just a river in Egypt. It's very, very difficult. So when something like this happens and people are utterly shocked, I'm like, I've been working full time for 12 years and I'm out on operation daily. So what do you think is happening around here? But again, then I take a step back and I go, okay, we haven't, or the organization or the government or whoever hasn't communicated properly what's actually occurring. And it's a fine line. You just don't want people to live in anxiety. You don't want the kids to be because they already are anxiety prone, and certainly having this constant inject of negative stuff coming out might not
like
do.
The Americans.
Yeah.
Well, I think they're doing it way too much. Obviously the news media, there's clickbait. But that's what I think is in Canada. Like I've heard stories of like, hey, there was a terrorist thing that was stopped, and I'm like, if I didn't know this person, I didn't know that happened. And I'm like, I feel like Canadians think because our agencies are doing their jobs, they have no idea what's actually going on, and they feel safer than. I mean, it's safe here. Like, when in some of the shootings that are going on right now, I'm like, hey, is anyone here in a gang? No, you're probably fine. Don't worry about it. If you hear gunshots, just run. But people are like, oh my God, hit the ground and go. People they don't have perspective in Vancouver because it's relatively compared to like a New York or an LA, it's safer, right? And because you guys are doing a good job, and because the media doesn't talk about it, people get so shocked. That's probably why there's some complacency of getting the public to do it, because they just have no idea, right, what's going on.
Yeah, it's a vicious circle too, because one of the units I was in was it's a really highly performing unit, and it's a really good unit, and it had great funding and everything following 9/11. And what's interesting is, so over the course, so the unit's formed, the people are specially trained, they're put in the locations, all this good stuff. 5 years later, nothing happened because they do a fantastic job, and the public is now starting to question the money that's being injected in there. Yeah. And so it's really hard in the policing world to quantify the things that are not happening. Well, actually, if we weren't there, this would happen, or this or that would have happened. Yeah. We can't say that because it's impossible, because we don't know. But we know that things would have happened. Yeah. Right. So it's really hard to sell yourself if your job is to prevent things from happening. Yeah. And that's a vicious circle. Like, you want to be defunded but we can't quantify what we've actually averted. And now we're back to, okay, so now we're short. So now things are happening. So now we need money. So you give us money, and then we get money, and now things stop happening, and now we're.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's
a
like
vicious circle.
like COVID, like regardless of whatever people believe on masks, 2003 or 4, SARS-CoV-1, Toronto got hit bad. Every province, this country had pandemic plans and storages of all the materials so we wouldn't run into what we ran into. And I don't know, I think it was like 6 or 7 years passed and they didn't renew any of the programs. And then you saw what happened, right? So I think using COVID as an example, again, I think they've lied about a lot of stuff, but whatever. Where was the emergency plans that you wrote down in 2003 for? Where was the equipment it's the same concept. It's like earthquake. Hey, you know the science says if a major earthquake can hit Vancouver in the next 50 years, does anyone have the ability? And then people are fighting with them all the time. Like, I've turned my truck into a bug-out truck for that reason, is if I need to get up and go, I can go for 2 weeks. I know most people are screwed. It's just people do not like to plan for the future.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's obvious and measurable and we can plan for it. They're like, no, I don't want to spend that $100 million every year for that. Are you sure? Positive. And then you see what happens.
Yeah, it's almost like you kind of want to invest in the things that are almost guaranteed in the offline. And I don't completely disagree with that, but there's certainly certain things that we need to take into consideration because our conditions and we're very fragile and very vulnerable right now.
Yeah.
And you're talking about EMP earlier.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything worse. Like,
it's a bad day.
Right now, we lose all communication. We lose all electricity. We lose all power. Oh, man.
I'm going camping for a few weeks, and hopefully you figured it out by the time I get back. That's my plan.
come back to zombie land.
Yeah. Well, I think the science behind zombies, as much as I'd love a zombie apocalypse, it would only ever last a few years because they would just...
We'd all be zombies.
Well, they'd either all be zombies or it would burn itself out, and then the survivor, you just go up in the mountains, and then you come back down a few years later, and you'd be fine. But yeah, circling back to the gun thing, like... Yeah, because we went way off topic there. Like, because... Yeah, I talked, like I said, I had a guest on a while ago who was very, like, I asked him about guns, and it's like, no, everyone should have a gun, because in America it's a right. Now, I think that there needs to be the right for people to have guns needs to be there, but there needs to be, you can't give it to crazy people. Like, stop giving it to crazy people.
So the answer is not everybody should have a gun.
Yeah. But taking it off the table completely, I think having it as an option needs to be somewhat entrenched so it stops being a political tool, but being reasonable about who can have a gun and the training required to have a gun. Because even now, like, I teach the PAL course, and I'm like, they met the standards of the course, and I'm reasonably obligated to pass them, but I tell them all, you need to go practice now, because I've seen people that I didn't teach at the range. Like, we just got our gun license. We just got guns. I'm like, you ever shot guns? They're like, no, not really. I'm like, okay, I'm going to watch them. And sometimes I have had to step in, maybe just do this. And so, it's almost become like a bureaucratic thing more than anything. Well, I do like the safe storage laws. We have safe storage. You must store laws. And the reason is it prevented, their suicide rates have dramatically dropped as a result of that. That's the forcing people who actually care to store guns properly has reduced suicides, because now I think I have to open the thing.
You have to make a conscious decision to do all the steps, right?
So stuff like that, and accidental deaths from, like, kids, I don't hear about that almost ever anymore. You hear it in the States a lot.
Of course, we want it to be nil.
Yeah. Now, as much as you don't want it to be, I take a firm stance that zeroism needs to stop, as in we want it to be zero. It just, you can't. If you try to make things zero, you're going to screw everything up. And I think that's where the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, we want it zero. I'm like, you're not going to do that. It's humans. You're not going to do that. And anytime they try to, like, we want to ban guns because we want no gun deaths. And as you said, like, I knew people in high school. I wasn't in gangs. I was a good kid. I didn't even do drugs until adulthood, right? And I knew people who get guns, illegal handguns, in high school. And it's just like, you tell people that, and like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, they're a low junior member of the triads. They can get guns. How much? I don't know. At the time, it was probably $1,000 or $2,000. Now it's like $5,000 or whatever, or $10,000. And then I talked to people who used to be in that lifestyle. Now, luckily here, when you talk to them, like a lot of them, they don't want to use the gun because they realize how expensive it is to replace that gun once they use it. So that's the reason why, at least in this culture here, the gang culture that I've talked to people, is they don't want to use the guns if they don't have to because it's so expensive. But the guys, that's why I say if you got shot as a gangster, like here, you pissed someone off. Like, what did you do? Right. And the average person, they just don't think about the realities of what's causing the problems. It's not me. I have guns. I barely even use them. Ammo's expensive, man. I don't have that kind of money right now. I have them because what if I gardener, a warrior in a garden, just in case. Right. I saw how people acted during the toilet paper wars earlier this year or last year.
Toilet paper war.
It's like that was completely in this province was unnecessary. There was no supply issues here, and you saw how people. And I'm like, imagine what would happen if there's an actual plague where bodies are literally dropping in the streets. How do you think people are going to react? Are you telling me you don't want guns? I think you want.
They're going to lose their minds. It's kind of funny because I have a few friends that. During the pandemic, contacted me and they're like, "Hey, I've been thinking of getting my PAL," and I'm just laughing, right? Because it's an interesting,
really interesting on
concept.
The PAL thing is we were only told not to teach for a very brief period from and then after that, it was like, okay, if you can teach based on the regulations, then if you feel comfortable, and that I was like quite shocked. I would have thought they would have been like, nope, you can't teach.
But that's administered by the RCMP, right? Not by the federal government.
Sort of. So the PAL programs are administered by the BC, the provincial branches. Whether it's a federal appointee, some places it's RCMP appointee. It's because of the politics. Some people are kicking out the RCMP appointees and putting in a provincially appointed person, and they kind of decide. But still, it is an RCMP thing. The RCMP could say, we are not issuing any of these during 100%. This time. They didn't do that. And I'm like, to me, that's where the disconnect between the politicians. I would have thought that it's okay, we're not issuing PALs during it, but they didn't.
But that's consistent with the stance the RCMP had taken initially.
Which means there's a disconnect between what's being said.
But there is a known disconnect.
Yeah.
We know what the disconnect is.
Yeah.
It's about political survival. It has nothing to do with actual... I know, it's frustrating. But here's the thing. I'm one of those guys that... there's the sphere of influence and the thing that I can do anything about, and this is completely outside. Like I can't do anything about this. And if they decide to take all our pistols...
I lost it in a boating accident.
aside from the obvious boating incident. Like,
that's the internet thing.
I don't really have like an overly emotional reaction to the attachment to anything. And I know some people will say, well, whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh, it's not going to break. It's fine.
But I try to let outside factors, affect me the least as possible. And this is just one of those things where it's really, really frustrating, but I evidently I'm seeing what they're doing here.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with objective data. This has nothing to do, actually, it's not even, it is data, period. It has nothing to do with the numbers. It has nothing to do with anything else. And just
on that note, I don't know if you I follow it a little bit. Allegedly, although the evidence is fairly damning, the RCMP still have the long gun registry data, and they're not supposed to, according to court order.
I have no idea.
Yeah, so that's the thing. There was a recent case. I don't know the details. Runkle of the Bailey is a really good YouTube Canadian firearm lawyer. Goes over this stuff. There was a court case regarding a firearm, and they asked the Crown, can you give over some information regarding this stuff? And they gave her some information regarding this person, and they're like, wait a second. The only possible way you have this information is the long gun registry still exists. And now they're going through another high river, like Alberta high river gun grab situation where it's like, wait, a federal court judge told you the entire organization to delete the data, and it looks like it's still somewhere. And this is why a lot of the super pro gun guys are like, I don't trust the cops.
Knowing the RCMP, they're probably like, where'd you put it? I don't know. Where did you put it?
Yeah.
What about you?
Someone found it and used the data. Now, either they didn't know that's where it came from, but that seems to be the message. Well, we don't know where that. What? It's Like, dude, that was a lot of personal records on a lot of people, and it's somewhere.
This is way outside.
I know.
My field of expertise.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
But just hearing something like that,
well, if it's substantiated, I mean, obviously,
it's very suspicious. It's like there's no way this data didn't come from anywhere. But that's why I get mad at that. Like, guns, no matter what. It's like, hey guys, like, let's have a rational conversation. But then they have the point. I don't trust the government, and that's the example they're pointing to is the High River gun grab. I won't get into the details. You can look up the High River where the RCMP denied any wrongdoing, and then the court stepped in, and it's like, yeah, you shouldn't have done that, right? It's just someone who's like, no, we're taking these guns. You don't have the right to do that because they used emergency powers wrongfully to do it and got in trouble, right?
And some chief super somewhere got slapped.
Yeah, and it's just like it's a complicated topic. It's like, but I think the consensus we have is you can have them, but be responsible with them. Yeah. Right, and know how to train with them. Yeah,
and it's but I do not believe that everybody should have them.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And actually, look at the people don't know this is if you look into a lot of the high-profile mass shootings in the last 20 years, it's like, why did they have guns? They were on the FBI watch list. The Nova Scotia shooter, that's a conspiracy theory in its own. Why did this guy have guns, even though he'd been reported continuously for 10 years by basically everybody? And they never took his guns. And again, it's not for sure. The allegation is he was a police informant.
Yeah, I heard that bounced around, and I've had some of my colleagues being vehemently denying that, saying this is completely preposterous. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. I don't know yet. Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see.
Like the bottom line is that guy was a red flag.
Yeah,
should never have had guns. Everyone was questioning why he had guns, and actually, the RCMP in Canada have the authority to come and say you don't get guns. So why did someone who was well known not lose his gun? Now, take comparison to say like the Pulse nightclub shooters a while ago.
I remember that very well.
That guy that should never have happened. He was on watch lists. So what happened? And I find it's a failure of leadership and responsibility of policing often to not get these guys away from guns where these things happen. Because in Canada, most part, this is not an issue. It's usually when someone's been reported and no one did anything about it.
Of course.
Nova Scotia happens. Although, again, there's some very strange, like substantiated strange stuff with the Nova Scotia one, like banking records that don't make sense. How he was paid. I think the question was he was paid in a way that the bank said
it's consistent to undercover operation,
which is like, that's okay. That's a pretty bold thing.
Yeah, but where's so I'll give you that, and I have no idea. I have no idea if that's the case.
I have no idea.
We'll find out because everything will obviously explode at some point. But if that's the case, then what's the correlation between this and the guns, anyways?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
So you mean to tell me that you even if you had an informant and you knew it to be a public risk, you wouldn't take their guns because they're an informant?
Yeah.
Like, what are you actually after? You after the information they can provide, and they're being paid and they're being remunerated for it. There are rules for this. They just don't get to do whatever they want. You know what I mean? So I'm not an expert in the field, but I'm just spitballing here, right? So I think. It'll be impossible to keep this on the wrap.
Yeah.
It's going to take time, and things
50 years.
Well, no, I think there's a lot of inquiries that are ongoing, right? That are still ongoing. Yeah. So a lot of the information hasn't been out.
I think perhaps what I'm getting at is that it's a failure of leadership to acknowledge a failure of something. We failed to arrest this person. We failed to keep tabs on this person, and it's easier for them to blame the guns. It's the guns. I think
you're talking about political leaders.
Well, because it's not just the political leaders. It's if I talk to the average Canadian of what their thoughts are, they're quoting American stuff.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah,
and so it's just the lack of knowledge on this topic matter. And then, I trust the experts. Okay, yeah, but they're lying. At least the political leadership, they're lying. Their experts are lying. They're lying. Well, why would they do that? Well, here's all the evidence. They're lying. So I need to re-educate this person about what the gun laws actually are and their stances, and if people are open to it, often they rethink their stance. But the sort of idea in public is guns are bad; they cause all the problem, but yet if they don't, it's other things. So we need the leadership to take actual responsibility for the failures of keep the problem people in check.
Yeah, right? Just like anything else that we do. that we do as humans, we tend to oversimplify everything because it allows us to process the
I
information.
want black and
easily.
white. Give me black and
Yeah,
white.
because it's easy. But life is in shades of gray.
Well, I so bring it back to self-defense is when I start talking about when you get the what if this, what if that. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I'm giving you the basic tools. You need to fill in the blank. Well, what if this? No, I don't know. Are you getting what I'm saying to you? I'm not there to whisper sweet nothings in your ear. How to now do combo A, B, C, D.
Mm-hmm.
It's not how this works. And
Micromanaging
yeah,
your use of force.
People want, right. People want that answer. And when you start to tell them it's not like that, I've had students that get mad. You're not teaching me what I thought, and they don't stick around. I'm like, well, it's okay, but it's that misconception that people want the black and white. Just teach me how to punch them in the face. I'm like, we have laws, You can't just do that. I mean, there are grounds when you can, but do you know what the laws are? Most people don't.
Well, what about the variables? Like he's moving, you're in a crowd, you're this, you're that. He knows what he's doing, or whatever the case may be. So it's very it's complex, right? It's not so simple, and this. It's fun. It's good that you're mentioning that because for me, that's what made jiu-jitsu so appealing.
Yeah.
I just love the artistic side of it.
Yeah.
It's like once you start looking at jiu-jitsu in terms of concepts rather than moves, you start opening your mind up to a whole bunch of different possibilities, right? Like and
conceptual learning.
Yeah, and addressing certain things become a very creative process. And
who doesn't love jiu-jitsu?
Man, who doesn't? Who doesn't? And if you don't, like, go to hell.
Yeah, I mean, I tell all of my students who are below a certain size, you need to do jiu-jitsu or wrestling along with the Krav Maga.
Sure you do.
Because of physics. And while I do cover ground stuff, I'm just like, you need such a high skill level. Like, I'm trying to cover so much topic matter in Krav Maga. Like, I just don't give enough time to grappling. I'm giving you basic concepts. You need to go get your blue belt. I require blue belt or higher in jiu-jitsu. Or if you're like, I was a college wrestler, I'm like, that's fine too. Before I'll give out a black belt in Krav, because I want you to, one, I want to see you're open-minded. You're willing to try new things. Two, I need you to understand how difficult it is to grappling, because I do teach arrest techniques and all that, but it's, again, I'm covering so much topic matter. I need you to be actually proficient. Mm-hmm. So go to jiu-jitsu. We're in Vancouver. There's lots of good skills. Budo Vancouver here, Budo Burnaby, Ascension, right? You can learn the skill sets. And a lot of people are like, I don't want to do both. I'm like, if you're small, you must do both. Mm-hmm. And if you're in this for the long haul, why won't you do both, right? Now, as we can go on jiu-jitsu for hours, because it's the gun stuff.
Would only be the only two listening.
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, Matt Kwan's podcast is successful, right? Self-defense laws in Canada, I think they're too strict in Canada, as in it's too much onus on prove this was really self-defense. Like, that's not how this works. And I look at case law, and it's like, flip a fucking coin as whether the jury votes you or the judge votes you guilty or not. It's like so confusing.
Yeah, it's been it's been really interesting, but I do think that generally speaking, in the cases where grievous bodily harm or death was at stake, where the person either had to kill someone, or I think most of the high stake cases have been ruled in the favor of the person using the self-defense, but they were put
through hell,
through the ringer in the process. Ultimately, the way I kind of look at it is the old saying, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. But I think it's important to have a general understanding so that you can mitigate some of the risk associated with a potential use of force. And if people don't understand, say a very basic principle such as when does it become excessive force for a civilian? And the threshold is way higher because training is not expected from a civilian. So therefore, they can make a tactical mistake and have the lenience of the court. The issue is, what does it take for somebody to know that once you say deliver the strike and the person is now on the ground unconscious, for you to come over and stump their head is excessive.
Now, I know people who have done that. And they got off. And I'm like, what? I know this person. And I'm like, what the fuck?
But again, that's because there's no actual training. So they can keep. There's all kinds of rabbit holes you can go down into. Like, they're not stress inoculated. They're not trained. So therefore, they're in an advanced, stress response.
The person I know, and sorry if you're offended and you listen to this, is a very good martial artist, was a very good martial artist. They have a temper problem.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard the facts of the case, I'm like, dude, I would have convicted you. But they got off. And I hear this all the time in Canada. Like, it's good to hear from what you've seen. Yeah, these chairs are so uncomfortable. That most of the time they don't even, it doesn't go through, but there's that social aspect. If you defend yourself, you've been through the ringer. Now, recently there was a case. Yeah, you probably haven't heard of it. But, and most people wouldn't have. I just saw it on my thing. Is this woman was almost beaten to death and stabbed the guy, killed him. And for some dumbass reason, the Crown held her in prison for a month and it's like, what the fuck?
What was she remanded? What was she remanded for?
I'm not sure the details, but dude, she was almost killed.
Yeah.
And in the process of almost being killed, she stabbed the guy. Fuck that guy.
Yeah.
What is the Crown thinking?
I mean, just being devil's advocate from an investigative standpoint, the only thing I could say is, and I don't know any details of the case, but if she withheld information, such as not wanting to talk about it or being advised by her lawyer to not say anything or whatever, then you could run into an issue where ascertaining the details of what actually happened might have been difficult.
Yeah.
And even though somebody else might be there to corroborate the information, saying this is what happened, whatever, if you're having a real issue establishing a timeline or the facts, you may edge on the side of caution, because now, what is the cost of releasing somebody accidentally that actually is a murderer? So now you've potentially endangered somebody else. So that's what happens sometimes. So I'm not suggesting that that's the case here, because maybe they had all the details and they still did that. Yeah. But it sounds a little sketchy.
Yeah, because I'm always telling people you need to know the laws, because if say you're carrying a knife here, well, in Canada you can't for self-defense. You're
but you're not carrying it for self-defense.
Yeah, you're carrying it for work purposes and stuff. But people don't even know that a lot. They're carrying like a 4 or 5 inch blade, and I'm like, why are you doing that? Because I forgot what you're specifically allowed to be carrying or not. And then they're like, oh, for self-defense. I'm like, don't say that, right? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I'll give you an example of a case that I know somewhat personally, because I met the guy who got killed. It was an ex-friend of mine. There's a reason, ex-friend, but this guy was known to police. He pulled a knife on one of his rivals on a bus in Richmond. There was a scuffle, and he got stabbed in the temple with his own knife and died. Now, the guy panicked, threw the knife away, which was his evidence. They ended up finding the knife, which is good. He ended up getting off in self-defense, but he was told, and I believe it's in the case record, that if you had been carrying your own knife, even if you didn't use it, there's no way you would have got off, because you would have had intent, right? So, that's what they were told. Now, of course, everyone is like, oh, my God, this guy was such a saint. He was a volunteer firefighter, the guy who got killed. I'm like, what the fuck? This guy's a psycho. Like, I knew, and his mother is in the paper, the typical, like, he's a saint. I was like,
of course.
No, man.
He's in a 3-piece suit.
Yeah.
He's holding a baby. And
no, I remember the time I had to pick up my ex-friend, because he was being abusive, and he chased our car down the street and punched the back of the window and left bloody footmarks. Now, I'm like, if I press charges, he might not have been killed, because it was a month after that. And I'm like, I don't care. He's a scumbag. But a lot of people would have been like, they feel remorse for that. Maybe I'm just a psycho myself, but I was like, I don't care, man. That guy was a piece of shit, right? And it's just that reality of violence kind of thing.
Yeah, sometimes some people are better not taking breaths.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's the so, like, on the self-defense thing, because we probably have similar, if they're a piece of shit, I don't care. Like, I don't care if gangs are shooting each other. It's the problem they're doing it in the public sphere.
I'll organize an event where you go to a large field, and we'll make sure the referees are in safe bunkers. And
go for it.
And go for it. I mean, because ultimately, and to be honest with you, that's a bit of an oversimplification too, because a lot of those kids that are getting wrapped up in this are actually salvageable. Yeah. And now they're 18, 19, 20, or 21, making some really poor decision and end up having lead flight their direction. And it's too bad, because if you could shake them out of their stupor and have that conversation and say, what do you think now? Are you listening? But now it's too late, because they get gunned down, or their girlfriends are, or whatever the case may be. So I think, but generally speaking, if you are a grown man or a grown woman and you're a gangster and you want to be living by the sword and dying by the sword, I'll give you a field to do it in, because we don't want the rest of our people, and we don't want the public.
Yeah. So you brought up a good point with the gangs, because the mentorship we kind of talked about at the beginning. It's like I always tell people, like, so we've learned more recently that the brain stops ish kind of developing around 25, not 18. So I always tell people, like, hey, if you are screwing around, well, regardless of gang or not, like, better be done by 25, and by the time you're 30, you better have it fixed, or it's not cute anymore. And that's sort of me and you agree, like, hey, if you're a piece of shit and you don't want to stop at a certain point, I don't care if you get killed. A lot of people would be like, you don't have the right to kill someone in self-defense because you're not judge, jury, and executioner.
You don't have the right to hurt someone in self-defense unless you are the person in needing self-defense.
Then it's all of a sudden it's fine, right?
So if you were, and I used to have these arguments about ISIS, and I keep on going back to ISIS. I have a generally visceral hate for that group.
But they were welcome back in our country.
Oh, buddy, don't get me started. But one of the things with ISIS was, and they were throwing gays off the buildings. They were burning Jordanian pilots in cages. They were and beheaded Christian girls and 7-year-old or whatever. They're just horrible. And so when you have somebody that has this holistic approach to problem solving some of those issues, and violence is never the answer, and whatever the case may be, I transpose the scenario to their own kids. So you have a daughter, she is 7. Now you have an ISIS executioner. He's already dumped 7 of them in front of you, and now he has yours. So now you have 2 choices. You try to talk him out of it and sort of initiate a meaningful relationship, and you get some cooperation and you potentially save your daughter, or you have an SAS sniper 200 meters away and he sends his brain out for a lunch. What do you want? Because right now you have 2 seconds to make that call.
Shoot him.
Well, they'll be shooting, right? Okay, so what you have said is that given the right circumstances, you would condone the use of violence to problem solve something.
I think that's actually a good analogy. What would you do with your children? Like, if you ask doctors sometimes, like, would you give this to your own children or family? And they just spent 20 minutes telling you why you need it, and then the answer to that question is no. It's like, okay, well, I don't need it. Right? It gets people. They're just, again, that decision. They're doing it because they think that's what they're supposed to do. But then when you actually force it, what would you do for your family? Which becomes a problem now when a lot of people aren't having families and don't care. That it's like, well, you shouldn't do it. And I'm like, you're right. As we talked about earlier, that person should not attack you. But guess what? They're attacking you now. It doesn't matter that they were abused as a child or they grew up bad life. It's irrelevant. They're about to kill you. What do you do? Right? And most people, they don't know, because a lot of suburb Karens have never had to deal with violence. So they just have no concept of what they're talking about, I think, is a good way of putting it.
Yeah, over my 20 years in policing, one of the things that's become very self-evident is the amount of shock in people's faces when they are suddenly victimized by something. And I've seen people whose whole life came apart. After, because it completely shattered the social norms, or at the very least the feeling of safety that they had, or whatever the case may be. And I think knowing that it's there and taking preventive actions is better than not knowing that it's there and getting hit solid and end up in a major downward spiral.
So it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. I think it's a pretty good place. My back is killing me with these chairs, and we are about 3 hours. Is there anything we talked about? Anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about, thought you might talk about? Get it in there before.
No, man. I think this was a great chat. I really enjoyed it, and it was also quite different from a lot of the podcasts I've been on. So
I'm not structured. I wanna see who you are. That's what I said at the beginning. I was telling him at the beginning, I like it when it's over an hour and a half, because you really start. You like, we know each other on the internet. We don't know each other personally, so you need to assess each other out, and then you start having that conversation. I think it's the reason Joe Rogan's podcast is so successful, because he's being real. It's being a real person. So if people want to find you, train with you, have you as a consultant, how can they find you?
Yeah, so for right now, one of the things I didn't do is a website because I didn't need it. Like there's been so much word to mouth. So right now I run off my Raven Strategic account on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
So Raven Strategic, common spelling. It's also attached to my personal Instagram account, which is at SLAV as in Victor CCMDR, so Slav Commander. That's just my first name, Sebastien Lavoie, not anything. People were asking me before, Slave Commander. I'm like, calm down, it's my first name. So SLAVCCMDR is my Instagram account, and you can hit me up on there. And if you have some questions, I'm all ears.
And when things open up again, you're teaching at Ascension Martial Arts now.
100%. So I'm co-owner at Ascension Martial Arts. We have a fantastic program. We have fantastic programs, kickboxing, BJJ, especially our BJJ program is off the hook.
Yeah.
And we're having the culture is very critical for me, and the culture is absolutely insanely positive in there. So we're having a great time. Come join us and have a great time.
Sounds good. Thanks for coming on, Seb.
Thanks for having me, bro.
Absolutely.
You're listening to The Warriors Day. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.